Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of mint tea, watching the last scraps of twilight fade over the hills west of the house. It was early September, one of those evenings in rural Vermont where the heat from the day finally gives up and the woods start cooling fast. The crickets were loud, the air smelled like cut grass, and the sky still held a faint band of blue before it dropped into full darkness. My house sits on a slope above the road, facing a rolling hill that's half forest and half old pasture. I'd lived there 3 years by then, long enough to know every usual sound: trucks shifting on the downhill, foxes screeching in the woods, the neighbors' wind chimes. It was a quiet night. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't think anything of it. I had just leaned back in the rocker and pulled a blanket across my legs when I saw the first sign of it, a faint white glow appearing behind the crest of the hill. At first I thought it was the moon, except the moon wasn't supposed to rise on that side. And this glow was small, tight, not spreading. It looked like a single point of light, too white to be headlights, too steady to be a house lamp. It was far away, maybe half a mile, and low to the ground. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The glow brightened slightly, like something rising slowly up the ridge from the far side. I waited for the shape of a car to follow, or for the glow to break into familiar beams as it came over the hill. But the light stayed round, compact, and lifted higher, smoothly, like it was being pushed up through thick fog, even though the air was clear. That was what made me sit forward. The motion didn't feel mechanical. It didn't bounce like off-road headlights. It didn't wobble like a drone. It just rose, calm and weirdly confident. By the time it crested fully above the hill, the glow was about the size of a softball held at arm's length. A clean white, not glaring, with no halo around it. Just a sphere of light suspended about 10 or 15 feet above the ridge. I felt this strange urge to stand, like staying seated was the wrong thing to do. Not from fear, more like instinct telling me to shift into some kind of alertness. I set the tea down, pushed the blanket aside, and stood up. As soon as I did, the glow shifted. Not backing away, not darting off. It simply paused for half a second, like acknowledging the movement, before slipping straight down behind the ridge, disappearing in the same smooth, controlled motion it had come up with. Gone. No fade out, no flicker. Just gone. The tree line swallowed the darkness again, and the hill looked normal, just a quiet ridge at dusk with the first stars starting to appear overhead. I stayed on my feet a while, staring at the place where the light had peaked above the hill. My eyes kept scanning the edges of the trees, waiting for the glow to come up again. Nothing did. I checked the time on my phone. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt longer, like something had stretched time in a subtle way I couldn't prove. When I sat back down, the crickets started up again, but softer. Sparse, like they were testing the air first. I tried to relax, but every few seconds I'd glance back at that ridge. The glow had been too deliberate, too smooth. Lights don't move like that unless someone or something is controlling them. I waited maybe 15 minutes before giving up and going inside to grab a jacket. When I stepped back out, the air felt colder than it should have, like the temperature had dropped faster on my property than anywhere else. I pulled the jacket tight and scanned the hill again. Then I noticed something new. The clouds overhead, thin, harmless streaks, were drifting normally east. But above the hill, directly where the light had appeared, the clouds changed speed, only in that one patch. They slowed visibly for a moment, like they passed through a layer of air that was thicker or warmer or something different. Then they sped up again, rejoining the normal flow. I'd never seen clouds behave like that. I walked down the steps into the yard, just far enough to get a clearer angle on the ridge. The grass was damp, the smell strong. Everything else felt too still. Even the road below was empty. "Hello?" I said into the dark without meaning to. My voice landed wrong, flat, swallowed fast like the sound didn't carry past a certain point. I shut my mouth and backed up the steps. Around 9:30, a car finally passed on the road, Jacob's old pickup, the engine rattling like always. I watched his taillights disappear. Just seeing another human that close made me feel more grounded, though I had nothing to say to him even if he'd stopped. When the glow didn't return, I tried going inside to distract myself. Tried watching TV, tried sorting some mail, but my eyes kept drifting to the porch window. The ridge sat there in perfect silhouette, unmoving, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was supposed to watch it, like missing something would be worse than seeing it. Around 10:15, I stepped back outside. The temperature had dropped again, not dramatically, but enough that I could see my breath faintly. The sky was darker, with thicker clouds forming overhead. The crickets were almost silent now. I listened hard, hearing nothing but wind in the birch trees on the far end of the property. Then the glow appeared again. Not above the ridge this time, through it. A faint white radiance bled upward between two tall pines, as if the source of the light was below the crest, but brighter than before. The glow rose slowly, slicing a thin shape between the tree trunks. But instead of lifting all the way into view, it stopped halfway, hesitated, and slipped back down. My heartbeat thudded painfully in my ears. I stepped backward toward the house. One foot hit the porch step. I didn't take my eyes off the ridge. The glow came up a second time. Slower, more deliberate, and again, it paused just before revealing itself. This time it hovered for several seconds. Not visible directly, only as a pale outline against the trees, but I could feel its presence. Not physically, but in that strange way you sense someone's attention before they speak. Like the air was leaning toward me. I raised a hand slightly, as if shielding my eyes from something brighter. The glow slipped back down one last time and didn't reappear. I stood there waiting long after it faded. My legs grew stiff, my hands numb. The ridge looked normal. The clouds resumed their usual drifting. Eventually the crickets started chirping again, evenly this time. I went inside, but didn't lock the door right away. My mind kept replaying the exact motion of that glow, how it rose, paused, and retreated with such controlled smoothness, like it wasn't moving randomly, but reacting somehow. Before going to bed, I checked the hill through the upstairs window. Nothing. The ridge looked empty, just dark trees against darker sky. But when I finally pulled the curtains closed, I hesitated. For a second, less than that, I thought I saw a faint white reflection move across the glass. Too quick to be from a car, too high to be from anything in the yard. I stood there, hand on the curtain, staring at nothing. My chest tightened until I remembered to breathe. I never saw the glow again after that night. But every time I sit on the porch now, especially near dusk, my eyes always drift first to that ridge, waiting for a small, deliberate light to lift into view, hover long enough for me to rise to my feet, and then slip silently back down behind the hill as if it had been watching me watch it. I was somewhere between Gallup and Farmington when it happened, on that long, empty stretch of Highway 491 where the mesas fade into open desert and the sky feels bigger than anything else around you. It was close to 1 a.m. I'd been driving for hours, trying to make it to my cousin's place before morning. The air was dry enough that my lips felt cracked, and the only light came from my headlights, and the insane number of stars you get in that part of New Mexico. There were no other cars. Not for miles. I kept checking the rearview mirror out of habit, but every time it was the same. Black behind me, black in front of me, and a thin line of road lit up by my high beams. The stars were bright that night, sharp and clear, like you could reach up and grab one if you stood on the roof of your car. I was half listening to some late-night radio hosts talk about baseball trades when the signal cut to static for a second. I didn't think much of it. Radio does that out there, but then the static didn't come back to music. It just went quiet. Not off. I could hear the faint hum of the electronics, but it wasn't picking up anything anymore. I tapped the console. Nothing. That's when the air changed. Not the temperature. Something else. Like the atmosphere itself got heavier, pushing down on the car just slightly. The engine sounded the same, but the silence around me felt layered, like there was something big above me, absorbing the sound instead of reflecting it. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel a little tighter, and then the stars dimmed, not flickered, not faded gradually. They dimmed in a smooth, coordinated wave that passed over me from the south to the north. It was like watching a dark veil slide across the sky, blotting out the brightness as it went. If I hadn't been staring straight ahead, I might have missed the start of it, but I caught enough to see that it moved like a single unit, one giant shadow crossing the sky. I slowed the car without thinking, dropped from 70 to around 50. The air felt thick, like the pressure was building in my ears. More stars dimmed overhead. It looked like something enormous was passing between me and the sky, blocking light as it moved. But there was no shape I could make out. No outline, no edges, just the stars disappearing behind something invisible. I stuck my head forward to see through the windshield better, heart pounding. For maybe 2 seconds, the strip of night directly above me went dark, completely dark. Nothing but black, like space had shut off. And then, just as smoothly as it had dimmed, the stars brightened again. Not in a wave this time. Every single one snapped back to full brightness at exactly the same moment, like someone had flicked a switch. The pressure in my ears vanished. The night sound returned. You don't hear much out there, but the silence felt normal again instead of heavy. The radio came back on mid-sentence. I didn't breathe for a few seconds, just kept staring upward through the windshield, scanning for anything that could explain what I saw. A plane? Impossible. Nothing that big flies that low, and there were no lights. A cloud? There were no clouds. Not even wisps. Just crystal clear desert sky. Something else occurred to me then. A thought I didn't want to think, that whatever passed overhead hadn't just blocked the stars. It had absorbed them. The light hadn't gone hazy or distorted. It had disappeared. I forced myself to keep driving. My hands were shaking enough that I gripped the wheel tighter so the car wouldn't drift. I glanced in the mirrors every few seconds. Nothing. No light behind me. No movement in the dark outside the beam of my headlights. 5 minutes later, the radio cut out again. A half-second of silence. Then it resumed. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It flickered once, went blank, then came back. The time was the same as before. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than the stars dimming. The idea that something messed with the electronics in a way I didn't understand. A little farther down the highway, the pressure in my ears returned for a moment, just a small pop, like changing elevation. I checked the sky again, half expecting to see another wave of darkness. Nothing looked different, but the feeling lingered like the air was remembering something. When I passed the only gas station on that stretch, the sign flickered twice as I approached, even though the lights looked fine from far away. As soon as I drove past, they glowed steady again. No one else was around. About 20 minutes later, I finally saw a pair of headlights in the distance behind me. They were too far to judge anything, just faint dots on the horizon. But when I glanced back again, the headlights were gone. Not faded, not turned off. Gone. A chill ran up my spine. I sped up, trying not to think about it, trying not to imagine whatever had passed above me circling back. When I got to Farmington, the first thing I did was pull into a well-lit gas station. I didn't buy anything at first. I just sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, listening. The radio worked fine. The air felt normal. The sky above town had that faint glow from light pollution, which weirdly made me feel safer. You can't see many stars in town, which meant I couldn't watch for them dimming again. Eventually, I went inside and grabbed a soda just to do something normal. The cashier asked if I was okay because apparently I looked pale. I told him I'd just driven a long stretch alone and needed to shake it off. He laughed and said nighttime desert drives always make people edgy. I didn't respond. When I finally got to my cousin's place, he was asleep. I lay on the couch, still wired, glancing out the window every few minutes, even though the blinds were down. I kept replaying the moment the stars vanished. How smooth the wave of darkness was, how coordinated, how impossible it seemed that anything physical could do that. But what got me the most was the silence that followed. That few seconds where the whole world seemed to hold still, waiting for the sky to come back. Even now, weeks later, whenever I drive at night and look up at the stars, I catch myself bracing for them to dim again. Not flicker, not disappear behind clouds, but dim in that perfect sweeping motion, as if something huge and silent is passing overhead, blotting out the universe for a moment before letting it return all at once. I woke up to a faint strobing on my bedroom wall. Soft, steady pulses of light that didn't match car headlights or anything else I'd ever seen at that hour. It was around 3:20 a.m. I remember that clearly because I checked the clock twice, thinking maybe I was half dreaming. The pulses kept coming, evenly spaced, lighting up the blinds in thin white slits. It wasn't bright enough to hurt my eyes, but it was too rhythmic to ignore. I got out of bed and crossed to the window. My neighborhood in Cedar Falls was quiet that night, colder than usual for early April, with a thin fog pooled low to the ground. I lifted the blinds just a little. Every streetlight on the road, 8 of them, was flickering in perfect sync, not like a loose wire or electrical surge. These lights were blinking the way a metronome ticks, same length of time on, same length off. Even the ones farther down the street that usually had a delay between them were matching perfectly. On, off, on, off. The fog made the rhythm even more surreal. Each flash lit the mist from inside, revealing the entire street at once before dropping it back into darkness. My first thought was a power grid issue, but the houses around me looked fine. Porch lights, indoor lamps left on overnight, all steady. Only the streetlights were stuttering, and they were doing it with a precision that didn't feel random. I stood there watching longer than I meant to, counting along with the pulses. 1 second on, 1 second off. Exactly. No variation. Eventually, curiosity pushed past the sleepiness, and I decided to step outside and see what was going on. Maybe a repair truck was down the road, or someone had hit a pole. Something explainable. I pulled on sweats and a hoodie and slipped out the front door. The moment my foot hit the porch, all the streetlights stopped. Not slowed, not staggered. They stopped mid-blink. Every single one froze in the on position, steady and bright, as if nothing strange had been happening at all. The abrupt stillness was jarring. My ears felt like they popped from a pressure change, even though the air itself was silent. I stepped off the porch, onto the walkway. The lights stayed solid. I waited for them to twitch or glitch again, but they didn't. The fog rolled gently across the street, like nothing unusual had happened. I walked to the curb, scanning up and down the road. No cars, no distant hum of engines, no wind, just the soft electric buzz of the lamps overhead. I stayed out there for maybe 2 minutes, unsure what I was expecting. When nothing happened, I turned around to go back inside. That's when the nearest streetlight flickered once. A single blink, so fast I almost thought I imagined it. I stopped and turned. The others stayed steady. Just that one near my driveway had done it. I took a step toward it. The bulb buzzed faintly, just a soft vibration, then went quiet. My breath formed a cloud in the cold air, drifting upward. The lamp flickered again, twice this time, quick little pulses. Behind me, another light down the road flickered once in response. I don't know how I sensed it, but there was a pattern forming. Not the neat 1 second rhythm from earlier. This felt more like signals. One light blinking, another answering. A conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. I backed up toward the porch without turning away from the road. The third streetlight, 2 houses down, blinked rapidly 3 times. Then silence. No movement, no sound. A moment later, the one directly across from my house responded with a single long blink. I felt something cold sink through my chest, a kind of instinctive dread. Streetlights don't communicate. They don't blink one at a time like they're responding to something unseen. I reached the porch steps. As soon as I lifted my foot to climb them, all the lights froze, solid, unwavering. I stayed there, half on the steps, staring. The fog got denser around the far end of the street, almost unnaturally thick. The lights at the end looked hazier, like their beams were bending. Then the beam from the farthest streetlight shifted. Not the bulb, just the light it cast. It moved a little to the left, then snapped back to center, like something tall had passed in front of it for the briefest moment. I stood there, frozen, gripping the railing. Another beam shifted, then another. Quick distortions in the fog, almost like shadows but too transparent, too smooth in movement. I strained to listen for footsteps or breathing, but there was nothing. Just the faint hum of electricity and my own heartbeat. The farthest light flickered twice, again perfectly spaced, which felt deliberate in a way that made my stomach tighten. I whispered out loud, "Is someone there?" As soon as the words left my mouth, every streetlight on the road went dark. Total blackout. The darkness swallowed everything so quickly it felt like the air had thickened. I couldn't see my yard, my driveway, my neighbor's house. Nothing. Even the fog seemed to vanish into the black. I took one step blindly up the porch, reaching for the door. My fingers brushed the siding, and then the lights snapped back on, all at once. The sudden brightness made me flinch. I turned toward the street, blinking against the glare. Nothing was there. The fog had thinned again, settling low to the asphalt. No shadows, no movement, no sign anything had crossed the beams of the lamps. Everything looked exactly as it always did. I went inside and locked the door without looking away from the street. My hands were shaking enough that I dropped the latch twice before getting it secure. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the living room lamp on and the blinds open just a crack so I could keep an eye on the streetlights. They stayed steady the entire time. Around 5:30 a.m., when the sky started going pale, I stepped back to the window. The fog had lifted. My street looked like any other morning. But then something happened that made my throat tighten. Just as the first sunlight reached the tops of the lamps, the last streetlight on the road, the one farthest from my house, blinked once. A slow, deliberate blink. None of the others followed. I stood there watching until full daylight washed out the lamps completely. I checked for power outages in the area, maintenance notices, anything that could explain synchronized flickering. Nothing. That night, the streetlights behaved normally. Every night since, too. No flickers, no signals, no rhythmic pulses slicing through the blinds at 3 in the morning. But sometimes, when I wake up for no reason and the room is quiet, I catch myself waiting for that soft strobe through the blinds, waiting to see if the streetlights are still out there communicating in the fog, stopping the moment I step outside, watching in a way I can't explain. I was walking the neighborhood loop the night it happened, something I'd started doing after work to clear my head. It was early October, cool enough that I could see my breath, but not cold enough for gloves yet. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke from someone's backyard fire pit. It was a quiet suburb outside Asheville. Nothing dramatic, just a grid of cul-de-sacs and small hills. It was close to 10 p.m., later than I usually went out, but I'd been restless and needed to move. The streetlights were spaced far apart on my route, leaving long stretches of shadow between them, the kind where your eyes have to work harder to adjust. Houses were mostly dark, except for the occasional blue glow of a TV behind curtains. I'd walked maybe half a mile when I noticed the sound. At first, I thought it was a transformer buzzing or maybe an AC unit that hadn't fully shut off, but it wasn't coming from the houses. It wasn't coming from anywhere on the ground, actually. It was above me, a soft metallic humming, steady, low, weirdly smooth. It wasn't loud, but it had a clean, unnatural precision to it, like the vibration you feel from electronics when you put your ear close. I kept walking another few steps, trying to pinpoint it. The humming stayed above me, moving with me, not staying fixed to any one yard or rooftop. I stopped. The sound stopped exactly when I did. My breath puffed out in a slow cloud. I listened hard. No insects, no distant cars, no dogs barking. Total stillness except for a faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Then the hum started again. Slow, gradual, like a machine warming up. I looked across the street to see if maybe someone had an attic fan running. All the houses were dark. I stepped into the middle of the road to get a clearer angle on the sky. That was when I noticed the clouds. They were thin that night, patchy streaks drifting lazily overhead. Most of them were just faint gray smudges against the dark. But one section, almost directly above me, was glowing softly. Not bright enough to illuminate anything below. Just a faint, diffused white light pulsing through the edges of the cloud, as if someone had put a lantern inside it. The humming grew stronger, not louder exactly, but more present, like the air molecules around me were tightening in response. I craned my neck, squinting at the glowing patch. It didn't look like moonlight. The moon was behind me and low on the horizon anyway, and no plane I'd ever seen could create that kind of consistent light through cloud cover. There were no flashes, no red or green navigation lights, no noise except the hum. I took a few steps backward down the road to see the cloud from a different angle. The glow didn't shift or change. It stayed exactly in the same part of the cloud, even though the clouds were drifting, which meant either the cloud wasn't drifting or something behind it was moving with it. Hello? I said out loud, despite not knowing why. The humming responded immediately by stopping. The cloud went completely dark. My heart hammered. I felt ridiculous, talking to a cloud. But nothing about that moment felt ordinary. The silence that followed was too heavy, like it was waiting for something. I stood there, middle of the street, listening. 20, maybe 30 seconds passed. Then the glow returned, but dimmer, slow, like it was testing the sky before revealing itself again. The hum returned too, but this time it had a slight pulse to it, almost like a slow heartbeat. The glow grew stronger, brightening gradually inside the cloud until the entire patch looked like it was being lit from within in by something the size of a van. The edges of the cloud curled slightly, like heat was distorting the moisture, except the air didn't feel warm. It felt colder, sharper. The hairs on my arms and neck lifted. I took a step forward. The glow didn't react. The hum stayed steady. I took another step. The cloud snapped to darkness. Not faded. Snapped like a switch flipping off. One moment it was glowing, the next it was indistinguishable from every other patch of night sky. The hum cut out at the exact same millisecond. I froze. Didn't even inhale. There was no sound, no wind. Even the leaves stopped rustling. The entire neighborhood felt like it had paused. I slowly turned in a circle, scanning for anything, movement, light, sound. Nothing. I exhaled shakily and started walking again, faster than before, trying to tell myself it was just atmospheric conditions or some weird distant spotlight I couldn't see. But the logic didn't sit right. The timing was too precise. The way the sound followed me, the way the light appeared and vanished exactly when I moved, it all felt deliberate. A minute later, the hum returned. Soft, distant at first. I didn't look up. I just kept walking, pretending I couldn't hear it. The hum grew a little louder, like it was drifting closer overhead. After a few seconds, I couldn't resist. I stopped walking and looked up again. The clouds above me were ordinary, dark, shifting, harmless. But a second later, the patch I'd seen earlier drifted into view again, carried by the wind. It passed right above me, gray and thin. As it did, a faint outline appeared inside it. Not a light, not a shape, more like a subtle distortion. The cloud bulging inward from behind as if something was pressing up against it, only for a moment. Then it slid past, the distortion evening out like nothing had touched it. I stood rooted to the sidewalk until the cloud drifted farther east. The hum faded the same way, gradually, naturally, until I wasn't sure if it was gone or simply too faint to detect anymore. I forced myself to finish the loop, though I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every time I passed under a streetlight, I felt exposed. Every time I stepped into shadow, I felt watched. When I reached my house, I went straight inside and locked the door. My hands were cold enough that the key slipped twice. I stood at the window for a bit, staring out at the street. Everything looked normal. Someone across the way turned on their porch light. A cat ran under a parked car. The neighborhood had resumed its usual rhythms. Before bed, I stepped outside for one last look. Just a quick check. The sky was darker now, clouds lower and thicker. No glow, no hum. But as I turned to go back inside, I heard one faint metallic ping, like a cooling engine or a metal plate being tapped. I froze. The sound came from above the clouds. Not loud, but perfectly clear. Then silence. I backed into the house, keeping my eyes on the sky until the door was fully closed. I haven't heard the hum since that night. But now, whenever thin clouds drift overhead on late walks, I catch myself listening, waiting for that soft metallic sound to rise out of the dark, for the faint glow to pulse behind the clouds again, just long enough to let me know something is there before vanishing like it never happened. I was halfway through a loop trail near Estes Park when I saw it, the one that cuts behind the ridge and gives you those panoramic views of the valley. I'd started later than I should have. Work ran long, and I didn't want to skip the hike completely. So, by the time I was heading back, dusk had already settled in. The temperature dropped fast the way it does at elevation, and everything had that bluish tint you get right before full dark. The trail was empty. It was a Wednesday, early spring, and most people didn't bother with that path unless it was full daylight. I'd only seen one other hiker on the way up, a guy named Mason who I'd talked to briefly while tightening my pack straps. He'd said something about making it to the overlook before sundown. I'd nodded and kept going. We parted ways at a fork, and I hadn't seen him again. By the time I reached the narrow section between two rocky outcrops, the sun was gone behind the mountains. The sky above the peaks was still glowing faintly, but the forest around me had gone dark. I turned on my headlamp, even though I didn't really need it yet. Something about the quiet felt heavier than usual. I had stopped at the overlook to drink some water and adjust my knee sleeve, and that's when I noticed the bright point of light. At first, I thought it was a star. It was the right color, white with just a hint of bluish halo, and the sky was turning dark enough for the first stars to appear. But this one was too low, too bright. It was hovering in the gap between two distant peaks, sitting where no star could be. I stared at it for a good 10 seconds without moving. It didn't flicker. It didn't waver with the wind. It just stayed exactly where it was, like someone had pinned it to the sky. I blinked hard, trying to adjust my eyes. When I looked again, the light had moved. Not much, maybe a couple degrees to the right, but the motion was so smooth it made my stomach dip. It didn't arc like a plane or dip like a drone. It drifted sideways in this unnervingly perfect glide, like it didn't care about momentum or gravity or anything else that normally affects something moving through the air. I lowered my water bottle slowly. The light drifted farther, still horizontal, still steady. I tracked it across the gap between the peaks. After about 5 seconds, it slowed, stopped, hovered again. I reached up to adjust my headlamp, even though it wasn't in my eyes, because something in me wanted to do anything other than keep watching that light directly. When I glanced back, it was still there, except the halo around it had dimmed, just slightly, like it was running low on energy. It pulsed once, softly, like a dying ember giving one last glow. Then it faded. Not instantly, not like a switch being flipped. It dimmed slowly, shrinking in brightness until it was nothing more than a faint dot, then nothing at all. I waited for a plane to follow it, or a satellite, or anything that could have explained what I'd just seen. But the gap between the peaks stayed empty. I checked my phone for the time, 7:49 p.m., then I noticed the signal icon, no bars. Normally I got decent reception up there, at least one bar. I held the phone up higher. Still nothing. The air had gone strangely quiet too. No wind, no rustling, not even birds calling from the trees. Just stillness. I put my phone away and started back on the trail, trying to convince myself I'd seen something explainable. Maybe a drone from a research group. Maybe some distant reflection, but neither explanation sat right. About 10 minutes into the hike back, I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I spun around, heart lurching. My headlamp beam cut across the narrow path. Nothing. Nobody. The footsteps continued, a soft crunching on gravel, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were off to the right, in the brush. I held my breath, listening. Crunch, pause, crunch. Slow, deliberate. It didn't sound like an animal. Animals move with more inconsistency, more noise. These steps had a rhythm to them, like someone trying not to be heard. "Mason?" I called out. Silence. I waited another few seconds before moving again. The steps didn't follow, but they didn't fade either. I heard one last soft crunch, like whoever, or whatever, was out there had stopped walking and was just standing. Watching, maybe. I picked up my pace. The forest seemed darker than before. My headlamp beam felt too narrow, like I kept missing something just outside its reach. I fought the urge to keep looking over my shoulder. Around the next bend, I noticed something strange. The air felt warmer. It made no sense. The temperature had been dropping steadily since I'd started back. But this patch of trail, just 20 or 30 feet, felt like someone had turned on a space heater. Warm air against the side of my face, enough to make me stop walking. I held my hand out. The warmth was strongest on the right side of the trail. I turned my headlamp toward the trees. The light hit nothing unusual, just pines and underbrush. But the warmth pulsed once, faintly, like a breath. I staggered backward, heart hammering. The warm air receded instantly. The temperature dropped back to normal mountain cold. That was enough for me. I kept moving, practically speed walking down the switchbacks. Halfway down, my headlamp flickered. Just once, a quick sputter. Then it steadied. I slapped the side of it anyway. New batteries, so it shouldn't have failed. The sudden darkness of that flicker sent a jolt through me I couldn't shake. A few minutes later, the reception on my phone returned all at once. 3 bars. The normal background noises of the forest came back too. Quietly at first, like the woods were warming up again. a distant owl call, wind brushing through leaves, life returning to the trail. By the time I reached the trailhead, I felt absurd for how fast my heart was beating. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and the overhead lamp buzzed normally. But before I got in, I couldn't help looking back up toward the peaks. Just for a second, I looked at the gap where the light had hovered. Nothing. No glow, no ember-like pulse. But something caught my eye far off to the right, another faint point of white. Not bright, not moving, just hanging there above a ridge I couldn't name. I blinked, and it vanished. I stood there another minute, staring, afraid it might come back, or afraid it wouldn't, I'm not sure which. Eventually, I got in the car and drove home. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting to see a floating pinpoint drifting behind me with that impossible smoothness. But all I saw were the dark silhouettes of the mountains and the fading colors of dusk. Nothing more. I was driving home from my sister's place when it happened, taking the longer back route because the main highway was closed for overnight construction. It was close to 11 p.m., early November, one of those cold, dry nights in rural Pennsylvania where the air feels sharper the later it gets. The road was empty. No houses for a few miles, no other cars, just woods on both sides and stretches of cracked asphalt my headlights barely managed to cover. I wasn't tired, exactly, but I was zoning out a little. I kept the radio low, more for company than anything else. The windows were fogged at the edges from the heater. Every time I passed a reflector post, it flashed bright white in my periphery, then disappeared behind me. About 5 miles from the turn that would take me back toward town, my headlights caught something ahead, something that didn't match the road signs or markers. A reflection, floating. It looked like a small spherical glint suspended above the pavement, about 5 or 6 feet high maybe. Not bright, not glowing, but reflecting my headlights back at me in this perfectly contained way, like light bouncing off a smooth metal ball. I slowed down automatically. My brain tried to process what the thing could be. A balloon? No, too steady. A drone? Maybe, but why no blinking lights? A windshield fragment? A trick of glass? The reflection wasn't distorted the way broken glass usually is. The closer I got, the clearer it became. A round, reflective object, just hanging there above the center of the road. My heart started pounding. Not in a scared way yet, more like my body realized something was off before my mind could label it. I eased off the gas even more, dropping from 45 to maybe 25. The object didn't move, didn't bob or tip like something dangling. It stayed perfectly still. My headlights should have lit up whatever was around it, trees, asphalt, anything, but the reflection was the only thing catching the light. The air around it stayed dark, unnaturally dark, like there was a barrier blocking the illumination from landing anywhere else. I rolled the window down a couple inches. The air outside was silent. Not even wind, no crickets, just the hum of my engine and the faint crunch of tires on the road. I kept creeping forward, expecting the object to break apart into some normal explanation the closer I got. Instead, it rose. Straight up. Not angled, not drifting. It lifted with this impossible smoothness, like it was on a track pointing directly into the sky. The reflection stayed perfectly round as it went, shrinking slightly as it got farther from the beams of my headlights. It didn't illuminate anything around it, not the branches overhead, not the air it passed through. My headlights bounced off it cleanly, but the light didn't spread or spill in any direction. It was like the reflection belonged to something that absorbed everything else. I stopped the car entirely. The object kept rising, slow and steady, until it reached maybe the height of the treetops. Then it vanished. Not shot off, not faded. It simply blinked out of existence, like someone flipped it off with a switch. My headlights shone forward again at nothing but empty road. I sat there gripping the wheel, feeling my pulse in my throat. I waited for the object to reappear, maybe above me, maybe down the road, maybe anywhere. But the sky was pitch black. No stars, thanks to cloud cover. No distant plane lights, just darkness. I turned off the radio so I could listen better. Nothing. No wind. The woods felt heavier than before, like the trees were leaning in closer. I stayed there for another 30 seconds or so, trying to work through what I'd just seen. I told myself it had to be a drone, some kind of reflective casing, something experimental. But drones wobble in the air, they're loud, they have blinking LEDs, This thing was silent and impossibly smooth, and the way it rose, completely straight, no acceleration curve, felt wrong in a way that tightened my stomach. Eventually, I forced myself to keep driving. About a quarter mile down the road, my headlights flickered. Just once. A quick pulse of dimming and brightening. I sat up straighter, watching the beams stretch ahead. They dimmed again, then returned to normal. I tapped the dashboard, even though the lights weren't connected to anything I could fix that way. The dimming stopped. I exhaled slowly. Another 100 yards, and the radio crackled on by itself with a burst of static. I hadn't turned it back on. I reached toward the knob, but before I touched it, the static cut out and the radio fell silent again. The woods around me still felt unnaturally quiet, like sound had been sucked out of the air. I drove faster. When I reached the fork that led back toward town, I breathed a little easier, knowing I was only 10 minutes from streetlights and other houses, but the road felt different, like the darkness had thickened. A minute later, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A faint flash. Just a small one, like a reflective surface catching the last scraps of my taillights far down the road. Too far to judge distance, too small to identify. I stared at the mirror, waiting for it to appear again. Nothing. The mirror showed only the darkness behind me. No headlights, no shape, no movement. But the feeling didn't leave me. I kept checking the mirror every few seconds. My grip on the wheel got tighter. As I rounded the last curve before the first cluster of houses, my headlights flickered again. Twice this time. A faint electronic buzz ran through the dashboard, like something was interfering with the wiring. Then everything returned to normal. The woods ended, the houses appeared, and the road lit up the way it always did. The silence lifted. I could hear my tires again. I could hear the heater fan. The whole atmosphere shifted back into what it was supposed to be. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the normalcy almost convinced me I'd overreacted. I sat in the parked car, engine idling, staring down the quiet residential street. I didn't expect to see anything. Part of me hoped I wouldn't. But just before I turned off the headlights, something flashed faintly at the far end of the road. A tiny reflection, too quick to identify, too far away to confirm. I shut off the car and went inside without looking again. That night, I kept replaying the moment the spherical reflection floated above the road. How perfectly it moved, how clean the light bounced off it, how absolutely nothing else lit up around it. I tried listing explanations in my head, all the normal possibilities, but none of them felt right. And even now, every time my headlights catch something reflective in the dark, road markers, trash cans, even someone walking their dog, I freeze for a split second, waiting to see if the reflection is where it should be, or if it's floating just above the ground, waiting to rise straight up into the dark again. I woke up because my water glass rattled. It was the smallest sound, the kind you usually get when a big truck rolls by or when the furnace kicks on. But at 2-something in the morning, I noticed it immediately. The vibration was faint, more like a low hum passing through the floor and into the wall behind my bed. I lay there listening, trying to figure out if it was actually happening or if I dreamed it. The house was silent. My place sits on the edge of town in a quiet part of Boone, North Carolina, where the only real noise at night comes from owls or the occasional car heading up the mountain. But the sound I was hearing didn't match anything I knew. It was too even, too steady, almost like a faraway generator running under the floorboards. I sat up slowly, waited, and felt it again. A gentle, almost inaudible vibration, just enough to make the bed frame faintly tremble. I put my hand against the wall. It buzzed softly under my palm. That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining it. I swung my legs out of bed and stood there barefoot, listening. The vibration continued for maybe 5 more seconds, and then nothing. Not a hum, not a tremor, not even the creak of the house settling after being disturbed. It was like something had passed through and moved on. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The sky outside looked wrong. Not bright, just lighter, like a soft glow had bled through the clouds for the briefest moment. There was no moon that night. I knew because I'd checked earlier when letting the dog out. But the sky had this faint, pale tint, almost like pre-dawn, except it was hours too early. I blinked hard and looked again. The sky went dark just as quickly as it had brightened, like someone dimmed a light behind thick fabric. I kept staring, unsure what I'd actually seen. My yard looked normal. The shed, the gravel driveway, the pine trees at the property line. Nothing moved. No headlights. No passing car to explain the glow. Nothing. The silence settled so heavily it made me feel suddenly watched. I lowered the curtain halfway and stepped back, waiting to see if the vibration returned. My ears rang in the kind of quiet that feels unnatural. After a minute, I grabbed a sweatshirt and went downstairs. My dog, Harper, was asleep in her crate but lifted her head when she heard me. Not whining, not afraid, just alert. Her ears flicked twice toward the back door like she'd sensed something too. I hesitated before opening the door to the yard, but curiosity won out over nerves. I slipped on shoes, stepped outside, and immediately noticed that the air felt off. Not colder or warmer, just heavier. The kind of heaviness you feel before a thunderstorm, except the sky wasn't stormy. The clouds hung low and still, no wind stirring the trees. I walked onto the grass, hugging my sweatshirt tighter. The moment I reached the center of the yard, the vibration came back. Not strong, barely there, but present enough that I felt it through my feet, a soft, uniform thrum spreading through the ground, like a distant engine running underground or something massive passing silently overhead. I looked up. The sky had lightened again, just a shade brighter than before, a dull silver glow filtering through the clouds. I stared hard, trying to see a shape or beam or anything that might explain it. The glow pulsed. Once, a slow, soft pulse, like someone breathing under the clouds. My chest tightened. I couldn't hear anything except that faint vibration, but the pulsing light made the clouds ripple in this subtle, unnatural way, like they were being disturbed by something right above them, something large enough to shift the atmosphere without creating sound. Then the glow faded, dissolving back into normal darkness. The vibrations stopped, and the silence settled again, even deeper than before. I stood there frozen, not sure if I should go back inside or keep watching. My yard felt too exposed. I felt too exposed. I almost called for Harper, but the thought of making noise in that moment didn't feel right. It felt risky. As I backed toward the porch, something else shifted. Behind the trees at the far edge of my property, a faint white glimmer flashed, quick like the reflection of headlights swinging across something metallic. But there were no roads back there, only woods. Thick woods that stretched for acres before the next house. I stopped moving. The flash didn't repeat. The trees didn't move. I listened so hard my head started to throb. Nothing. No rustling. No owls. The entire forest felt muted, like the wildlife had gone silent all at once. I backed onto the porch, opened the door as quietly as I could, and slipped inside. Harper sat up, staring toward the window, ears pinned forward. She wasn't growling, just listening. I watched her for a good 30 seconds, wondering if she'd relax or lie back down. She didn't. She kept her eyes on the window until the vibration returned again. Only a soft tremor, barely enough to make the hanging mug rack jingle once. The sky brightened through the curtains. I didn't want to look, but I did. Another pale glow, rippling under the clouds like something massive was passing behind them at an impossible height. This time the glow stretched wider, almost the length of my backyard, diffuse and even, like a sheet of light rather than a point source. It lasted longer, maybe 4 or 5 seconds, long enough for me to feel my breathing quicken, long enough for Harper to let out a low, confused whine. Then it faded instantly. Dark again, the vibration cut off, and everything went still. I pulled the curtains closed fully and stood with my back against the wall, waiting to see if anything else happened. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Maybe 5 minutes passed without change. Harper finally circled once and lay down, though she kept her head raised and eyes open. Eventually, I went back upstairs, though I didn't turn off any lights. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the same wall that had been vibrating earlier. I put my palm against it again. Nothing. The house felt normal. The air felt normal. The sky outside had gone completely dark, no lingering glow. I tried to convince myself it had been a distant plane or atmospheric refraction or some strange seismic thing. But none of those explanations matched the way the light moved, like something was breathing under the clouds, not above them. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, everything looked ordinary. The sky was overcast, the air smelled like damp pine, and Harper acted like nothing strange had happened. I checked the news for reports of tremors, outages, meteor sightings. Nothing. But around noon, while I was making coffee, I heard a faint vibration again. Just a single, short tremor through the wall. I froze, waiting for the sky to lighten. It didn't. The vibration didn't return either. Just that one moment. Small, quiet, almost like a reminder. Since then, whenever the clouds settle low over the mountains or the house goes too quiet at night, I catch myself listening, waiting to see if the vibration comes back, soft enough to question if it's real, just before the sky brightens with a light that shouldn't exist. I'd been driving since early morning, heading west through Kansas on my way to visit my brother in Colorado. It was one of those long, flat stretches where the scenery barely changes for hours. By the time I hit the rest stop outside Oakley, the sun was setting, and my back felt like it had molded permanently into the shape of the driver's seat. I pulled in mostly to stretch my legs and eat something that wasn't gas station peanuts. The rest stop was quiet, maybe 8 or 9 cars scattered around, a couple of semis idling in the truck section, and a picnic area no one was using because the temperature had dropped faster than expected. The sky was a deep orange fading to blue, the kind of dusk that makes everything look softer. The air was completely still. Not even the grass by the dumpsters moved. I parked near the far edge of the lot, rolled my shoulders, and got out. My car door made a sharp metallic ping when I shut it, echoing louder than it should have. With how quiet it was, I half expected someone to poke their head out of an RV just to see who made the noise. I walked a few laps around the lot, checked my maps, and took a few sips of water. Then I sat on the edge of the curb facing my car and the others. I wasn't in a rush. I figured 10 minutes off the road wouldn't hurt. That's when I noticed something strange. My car rocked slightly, just a small shift, like someone had leaned against it or a gust of wind pushed it. Except there was no wind. I would have felt it on my face or seen it in the grass. The air was perfectly still. My first thought was that maybe the suspension had settled, but then the blue sedan next to mine rocked too. Same gentle motion, same subtle sway forward and back. I stood up. Another car, farther down the row, a silver minivan, shifted the exact same way. A soft creak sounded from its roof rack as it tilted maybe half an inch. I walked closer, scanning the horizon, looking for signs of wind. The trees by the bathrooms didn't move at all. The flags near the entrance hung limp. My hair didn't even twitch. Yet every parked car around me swayed like a mild earthquake was rolling under the asphalt. My stomach tightened. I crouched down and put my hand on the pavement. It wasn't vibrating. It didn't feel warm or disturbed. Just normal, cracked concrete. The rocking grew slightly more noticeable, still gentle, but synchronized, like the cars were all responding to the same unseen force. The semis in the distance moved too, their trailers shifting silently like something was nudging them. No one else seemed to notice. A guy walking out of the bathroom didn't even look up from his phone. A woman in a pickup near the entrance opened her door and climbed in without glancing at the motion around her, even though her own truck moved under her weight more than usual. The air felt heavier. Not in a physical way, more like the atmosphere had developed a pressure beneath the silence. I stepped away from the cars and turned toward the picnic area. Above the rest stop, maybe 100 feet up, something flickered. A faint glow, soft white, almost bluish, gone as quickly as it appeared. I narrowed my eyes, thinking maybe it had been a reflection from a distant plane catching the last bit of sunset. But the sky was dark enough now that no planes were visible, and the flicker came from directly above the parking lot, not across the sky. Then it flickered again. Brighter this time, still silent. A kind of pulse that didn't illuminate anything around it, not the bathroom roof, not the lampposts. It was like the glow existed only within itself, refusing to spread outward. The cars rocked harder for a moment, not violently, but deliberately, like they were responding to the flicker. A low ringing sensation hummed in my ears. Not sound exactly, more like pressure shifting, too subtle to name. The glow pulsed once more, softer, and then vanished completely. Instantly, the rocking stopped. Every car, every truck, frozen in place as if nothing had happened. The air lightened, the pressure feeling faded. The silence returned to normal. I stood in the middle of the lot, feeling strangely exposed. I glanced around, waiting to see if anyone else had reacted. The guy with the phone got into his SUV and backed out without hesitation. The woman in the pickup turned on her headlights like nothing was out of the ordinary. A trucker climbed into his cab, humming loudly enough for me to hear from across the lot. No one had seen anything. Or if they had, they weren't acknowledging it. I walked back to my car, taking slow steps, half expecting it to move again. It didn't. The frame was still, tires resting normally against the pavement. I reached out and pushed the side mirror gently. It moved with normal resistance. Nothing unusual. But as I circled around to the driver's door, I noticed something small. Dust. A fine layer of chalky dust covered the roof and windshield, like my car had driven through a construction site or a gravel storm. But I'd been on the interstate for hours. No dirt roads, no recent storms, nothing that would explain the thin gray coating. I wiped some off with my finger. It left a smear, but didn't feel gritty. More like powder. I sniffed it. No smell. I checked the cars next to mine. Same dust on their roofs. Same texture. Light enough that it vanished when I blew on it. That's when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. No service. Not one bar. Earlier I'd had full coverage on the interstate. The rest stop should have been no different. I tried toggling airplane mode. Nothing. I climbed into my car, locked the doors on instinct, and sat there breathing carefully. My headlights illuminated the empty parking space ahead of me. The lot looked normal again. Peaceful. The glow above the rest stop felt like a hallucination. Except the dust and the memory of the rocking wouldn't let me write it off like that. I started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered for a split second before stabilizing. The radio produced a short burst of static even though it was turned off. I hit the button to turn it on, then off again. The static stopped. My hands were shaking when I pulled out of the lot. As soon as I got back onto the highway, my phone buzzed again, full service. Notifications poured in like nothing had happened. I checked the rearview mirror repeatedly for the first 10 miles, watching the sky over the rest stop shrink behind me. At one point, I thought I saw another faint flicker far back on the horizon, just a split flash. But it could have been anything. Distant lightning, a reflection, my imagination. Still, I drove the rest of the way to my motel with the radio silent and my eyes darting between the mirrors and the road. Later that night, after checking into the room, I looked at my car through the window. Even under the yellow parking lot lights, I could see that same chalky dust still coating the roof. I touched it again, just to be sure. Same texture, same odd weightlessness. I slept poorly. Kept waking up thinking the room was swaying or that a faint glow was shining through the blinds. The next morning, every bit of dust had washed off easily with dew, except for a few smudges on the windshield. The car looked normal again. But whenever I pass by rest stops now, even ones I've never been to, I catch myself checking to see if the parked cars are moving at all, if the air is heavier than it should be, if the sky is just a little too bright for no reason. And sometimes, for just a second, I swear I see something flicker above the roofs before it disappears. I was driving back to my place outside Tillamook after visiting a friend in town, taking the back roads because the main highway was thick with late-season tourists. It was close to midnight, and a heavy fog had rolled in from the coast, one of those dense, wet blankets that swallow sound and make the trees loom twice their size. My wipers were on the lowest setting, brushing away mist more than rain. I'd taken this road hundreds of times. It wound between patches of forest and small open fields, eventually dropping down toward my cabin near the river. The fog didn't bother me. What bothered me was how quiet everything felt. Even with the windows up, I usually heard frogs or the ocean wind drifting inland, maybe a distant truck on 101. But that night, there was nothing. Just the soft hum of my engine and the steady click of the wipers. I rounded a bend where the forest rises sharply on both sides, the trees forming tall walls of dark shapes. That was when a cluster of lights appeared above the tree line. At first, I thought it was a plane banking low, but these lights were too slow, too smooth, and too close. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them. Soft, white-yellow dots arranged loosely in a curve. Not twinkling, not bright, just steady. They glowed through the fog in this muted, almost unreal way, like lanterns behind frosted glass. I'd never seen lights like that above the woods. I eased my foot off the gas, but didn't stop. part of me wanted to believe it was just a helicopter or maybe a group of paragliders with LED rigs, even though that made no sense at all at midnight in thick coastal fog. The lights moved together, not rigid, not perfectly aligned, but with a kind of shared rhythm. Imagine how small fish move in a group, drifting in the same direction without touching. That's what it reminded me of. They floated slowly above the tree line on my left, maybe 30 feet above the highest branches. No sound, no breeze, no engine hum, just that steady drift. I rolled down the window halfway. Silence. Total silence. Even the usual drip of moisture from the branches seemed absent. The air was wet and cold, hitting my face in little pinpricks, but it carried no noise at all. The lights shifted slightly, turning, or maybe rotating, I couldn't tell. The fog distorted their edges, making them look like soft orbs instead of sharp points. They passed over the road ahead of me, slow and deliberate, moving toward the opposite side of the forest. I stopped the car without realizing it. My headlights lit up the fog in front of me, creating that tunnel effect where you can only see a few feet ahead. The lights above cut through it more cleanly somehow, like the fog bent around them instead of swallowing them. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, trying to understand what I was seeing. The lights began to descend, not drastically, just a few feet, but enough that I caught myself gripping the wheel tighter. They hovered there for a moment, swaying almost imperceptibly, and I felt the same sensation you get when someone stands behind you without speaking. A kind of awareness, pressure, attention, whatever you want to call it. Then the fog shifted. A light breeze rolled in from the west, thinning the mist in pieces. My headlights reached farther. I blinked, trying to clear the moisture from my eyelashes. When I looked up again, the lights were gone. The tree line was dark and empty. The fog drifted across the branches like normal. Nothing moved above them. I rolled the window all the way down, listening. Still nothing. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were waiting for something. I swallowed and stepped out of the car, not sure what I expected to hear or see. The gravel under my boots sounded sharper than usual. My breath formed a shaky cloud in the air. I walked a few steps toward the ditch at the edge of the road. The smell of damp earth was strong, almost metallic. The forest loomed on both sides, black and impenetrable. Something snapped, a twig or a branch, deep among the trees on my right. I froze. The sound echoed far too cleanly through the fog, like the forest had been holding its breath until that moment. I strained my ears, but no follow-up sound came. The woods didn't return to their normal rustling. They just stayed unnaturally still. A soft vibration passed through the air. Not loud, more like the faint hum of distant machinery, but there was no machinery out there. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, then faded. I backed up toward the car, not taking my eyes off the tree line. The fog thickened again as the breeze died. The whole atmosphere seemed to close in. Once inside the car, I locked the doors, which felt ridiculous, considering whatever I'd seen wasn't the kind of thing a lock would matter to, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. I turned the headlights off for a moment, just to see if the darkness revealed anything. Nothing, just black trees and shifting fog. When I turned the headlights back on, my rearview mirror flashed white for a split second, like something reflective had caught the beam. I whipped around to look out the back window, but all I saw was fog and faint outlines of trees. I don't know why, but I started driving without checking my directions. Instinct more than logic. The fog swallowed the road in front of me, but I kept going exactly the speed needed to avoid outdriving my headlights. My fingers felt numb on the wheel. For the next mile, the forest remained silent. Too silent. Even as the fog thinned near the river turnoff, the usual chorus of frogs was absent. No owls, no rustling, just the sound of my tires on damp pavement. Right before I reached my driveway, the woods behind me lit up faintly. Not a flash, not bright, just a soft glow filtering through the fog, like the lights were drifting somewhere beyond the trees again. I didn't stop to look. I pulled into my drive, hurried inside, and double-checked every lock, even though it made no logical sense. Much later that night, when I finally looked out the window toward the tree line, the fog had mostly lifted. The forest looked normal again, peaceful, untouched. But the quiet lingered until sunrise. Too deep, too whole, as if the woods hadn't yet decided it was safe to make noise again. And even now, Whenever fog rolls in from the coast and settles low over the trees, I catch myself watching for those soft, drifting lights to reappear, not bright enough to scare me outright, but strange enough to make me question whether they were ever meant to be seen at all. I was night fishing on Lake Mendota, something I'd started doing after work when my schedule got weird and I couldn't sleep until late anyway. It was early June, warm but not sticky, with a thin layer of fog hovering over the water. Not enough to hide anything, just enough to make the horizon blur. The lake wasn't busy that night. One pontoon way out near Governor's Island, a kayak closer to shore, and me sitting on the old wooden dock behind the park. It was about 11:40 p.m. I remember that because I kept checking the time, debating whether I should pack it up soon before the humidity really kicked in. My lantern was dimmed low to avoid spooking fish, and the only sounds were gentle water laps and the occasional plunk of a carp somewhere in the dark. I was retying a knot when I noticed the light. A thin, perfectly straight line of white sliding across the lake's surface. At first I thought it was a reflection. Maybe headlights from the road behind me hitting the water through a gap in the trees. But cars had passed earlier, and their reflections had always been broken, jittery. Nothing like this. This light was clean, sharp. It moved in a slow, steady sweep, cutting right across the faint fog sitting on the water. I froze with the line in my hands. The beam was so thin it looked like someone had drawn on the lake with a white pencil. It stretched maybe 30 or 40 feet and moved as if coming from a high-angle spotlight. Except when I looked up, the sky was empty. No planes, no drones, just a dark, hazy expanse with scattered stars. I stood up. The line of light continued sliding, perfectly horizontal, as if scanning the water. When it reached a patch of reeds near the shore, it didn't bend or waver, just passed cleanly over them as the reeds weren't even there. My breath caught in my throat. There was no sound. Not from the water, not from the trees, even the insects had gone quiet. I slowly turned my head to look for any source, someone on the dock, someone on the far shore, a boat with a floodlight. Nothing. The pontoon I'd seen earlier was gone. The kayak had paddled off without me noticing. I was the only person left. The line of light stopped moving. It held still on the surface about 20 yards out. I could see the tiny ripples of the lake distorting it, but the line itself didn't break, which didn't make sense. Light doesn't stay that perfectly straight when water moves underneath it. I took one step closer to the edge of the dock. The light reacted. It shrank, like it contracted into itself, becoming shorter but brighter. Not by much, but enough that I felt it more than saw it. A sudden alertness, like someone focusing their attention. I stayed completely still. For several seconds, nothing moved. The lake felt held in place, like suspended. The fog drifted around everything except that line of light, like it avoided getting too close. Then the line expanded again, slowly, stretching back to its previous length, and it began sliding the other direction. Not fast, not jerky, just smooth, deliberate, like it was searching for something. I watched it move all the way to the far end of the dock, where it paused again. The water lapped softly against the wood, but even those sounds seemed muted. Then I noticed something else. My fishing line, which had been dangling motionless in the water, was vibrating gently. Not from fish, not from wind, just a steady tremor that traveled up the rod and into my hand, and into my hand. I reeled in quickly, not wanting anything touching the water near wherever that light was. The vibrating stopped once the line cleared the surface, but the moment I set the rod down, the light contracted again, brightening for a second time. It wasn't reacting to sound. It wasn't reacting to movement on the water. It was reacting to me. I backed up to the midpoint of the dock, heart pounding. The planks creaked under my weight, and the sound echoed strangely across the lake, like the fog muffled it unevenly. The light expanded once more, stretching wide, then faded slightly, not disappearing, but dimming to a barely visible outline. I held my breath. The light brightened again, sharper than before, and then, without warning, it vanished. 1 second it was there, sliding over the water, and the next the surface was completely dark, only the faint reflection of my lantern marking where the dock met the lake. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavy, expectant. I waited for the line to reappear. Nothing. I turned slowly, scanning the sky again. Still no planes, no distant spotlights, no search beams, just a still, clouded night that hadn't changed at all. I picked up my lantern and held it out toward the water, half expecting the light to reveal something just under the surface. The lake stared back, black and calm. That's when a small splash sounded off to my left. Not a natural one, not a fish. It was too clean, too centered, like an object had dropped into the water with intent. I swung the lantern toward the sound, lighting up only fog and ripples. Another splash came from behind me, then one from farther out. Not rapid, not chaotic, just sporadic drops, like pebbles falling from nowhere. I stood perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the lantern handle. The splashes continued for maybe 15 seconds, then stopped all at once, and then the entire forest seemed to inhale and go silent again. I packed up without bothering to coil my line properly. Every sound I made felt wrong, too loud, or too sharp, or out of place. Even the metal clasp on my tackle box clicked like it was being amplified. As I was about to step off the dock, I hesitated and looked back one more time. For a split second, less than a blink, I saw a faint line of light flicker across the water again. Not sweeping, not moving, just appearing like a ghost of the first one. Then it disappeared completely, leaving the lake as black as ink. I practically jogged back to my car, though it felt like the world was stuck a half second behind me. The fog thickened near the tree line, swallowing the shapes of the picnic tables and trash bins. When I reached the gravel lot, my headlights reflected off something on the water, a short, sharp gleam, before fading. I drove home with the radio off, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything through the fog. When I finally got home and stepped inside, the silence in my living room felt too similar to the silence at the lake, like it had followed me. The next morning, I went back to the dock out of stubbornness. The lake looked normal. Kids were fishing, boats were out, the fog was gone. There was nothing unusual on the water. No light, no splashes, no silence that felt like pressure. But once when the sun hit the surface just right, I thought I saw a thin white line gliding across the water toward the reeds. It vanished before I could be sure I hadn't imagined it. I was taking out the trash a little after 11 p.m., later than usual because I'd gotten sucked into a phone call with my sister. It was early October, that weird in-between weather where the air is cool, but still carries traces of summer warmth. My house sits near the edge of a small neighborhood in Ashford, Connecticut. Quiet, lots of trees, not much light pollution. On clear nights, you can see more stars than you'd expect for being only 20 minutes from a college town. The trash bins sit by the side gate near the maple trees, which always drop leaves earlier than everything else. The yard was scattered with them, the smell of damp leaves drifting around as I stepped outside. Nothing unusual. I wasn't thinking about anything except whether raccoons had gotten into the bags again. About halfway to the bins, something caught my eye above the roofline. A patch of sky looked wrong. Not darker or brighter, just slightly blurred, like heat distortion off asphalt in summer. Except it was a cool night, and the distortion was up among the stars, not near the ground. At first I thought maybe I'd smeared something on my glasses, so I took them off and wiped them on my shirt. The distortion was still there. A soft, wavering patch of air, vaguely oval-shaped, drifting across the stars at an even, slow pace. The stars behind it looked warped, stretched just slightly as if seen through moving water. No light, no sound, no edges I could define. Just a shimmering patch that didn't belong. I stood there holding the trash bag, staring up like an idiot. It moved steadily from west to east, maybe the speed of a small plane if the plane were totally silent and barely visible. I waited for the silhouette of a jet or a blinking wing light to show itself, but nothing did. The distortion kept its shape, never revealing anything solid, just wavering, bending the background like something transparent passing overhead. The bag in my hand rustled suddenly, even though I wasn't moving. A small breeze brushed past me, but the trees didn't react. The leaves on the ground didn't shift. Only the bag did, as if the air right around me had changed pressure for a moment. I took a small step backward toward the porch. The distortion above paused. Not a full stop. It was more like the motion slowed to almost nothing. The stars continued drifting behind it normally, so I could tell the distortion itself had altered its movement. My stomach tightened. I waited to see if it would speed up or disappear. Instead, it rotated, not physically. I don't know how to describe it, but the distortion twisted slightly, like whatever was causing it had changed orientation. More stars bent and rippled behind it. The patch grew a little more defined, the edges tightening as though it were concentrating or focusing. Then, just as I started to feel real fear, it resumed drifting eastward. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe normally until it was halfway past the tree line. The distortion grew fainter, stretching as it went, thinning until it looked like nothing more than warm air rising from the roof of a house in summer. It dissolved completely about 5 seconds later, vanishing into the star field. I let out a breath and tried to make sense of it. Maybe a temperature inversion? Maybe my eyes were tired? I had been staring at a screen for hours before going outside. But then I heard a noise behind me, a soft thump from the far side of the yard near the shed. The leaves rustled in a small circular patch, as if one spot of air was pressing down or swirling, the same way dust moves under a ceiling fan. But there was no wind, and the rest of the yard was perfectly still. I stared at that spot until the rustling stopped. Whatever caused it disappeared without a trace. I dropped the trash bag into the bin and backed toward the porch. The yard felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just empty in a way it normally didn't. Like something had passed through and the space it left behind hadn't settled yet. Inside, I turned off the porch light, thinking I'd try to see the sky more clearly through the sliding glass door. The distortion was gone, but the stars in the direction it had traveled looked off. Maybe I was imagining it, but they seemed brighter than the ones overhead. Sharper, as if the air there had been scrubbed clean. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. When I checked it, I saw a notification telling me the compass needed calibration. I hadn't used the compass in weeks. I opened it and watched the little calibration animation spin for longer than normal before it finally settled. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and went back to my call with my sister. I didn't mention anything. It felt too weird, too flimsy to explain. Like saying it out loud would make it sound ridiculous. Eventually, I went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the faintest tapping noise on my window. Not loud, not aggressive, just a soft tick every few seconds, like something lightly brushing the glass. I sat up, heart jumping, listening hard. The tapping continued. Irregular, but real. I forced myself to get up and check. When I slid the curtain aside, I saw nothing outside except my own reflection and the dark yard. The porch light was off, but the stars were bright enough to give everything a faint outline. No animals, no branches hitting the house, just darkness and still air. Then I noticed something. The same patch of sky, now farther east, looked slightly blurred again. Faint, thinner than before, but visible. Like whatever it was hadn't left completely. A soft ripple passed across it. I blinked. The distortion vanished instantly. The tapping stopped at the same moment. I backed away from the window. The house felt too quiet, like the air itself was listening. I didn't sleep much after that, mostly lying awake and staring at the ceiling. The next morning, everything looked normal. Birds were loud again. The air was bright and warm. My yard was just my yard. But when I checked my phone before leaving for work, the compass asked for calibration again. And that night, when I took the trash out a second time just to test myself, I found myself staring up automatically, searching for that wavering, impossible patch. For a long moment, the sky looked perfectly normal. Then one single star in the east flickered. Not twinkled, but flickered, and slid sideways just an inch before settling back into place. It was so subtle I could have blamed my eyes. I didn't stay outside long enough to decide. I was sitting in the empty lot behind the old Ridgeway Outlet Mall, the one they shut down years ago but never bothered to demolish. The place had become my go-to spot whenever I needed to clear my head during long drives. No traffic, no people, no lights, except the ones from passing cars way off on Route 6. It was around 10:30 p.m., late enough that the sky had gone fully dark, but early enough that I wasn't tired yet. I had stopped there because my GPS kept losing signal. I figured I'd sit for a minute, stretch, maybe let my phone reset itself. The air was cool and dry, the kind of early autumn night where sound travels weirdly far. Even the hum from the highway sounded too crisp. I parked near the middle of the cracked asphalt lot. Weed clusters pushed through the pavement here and there, and the building itself sat dark and hollow behind me. I shut the engine off and leaned back in my seat. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I picked it up and saw the Compass app open, one I hadn't touched in weeks. It must have launched accidentally, or I'd tapped it when I grabbed the phone earlier. At first, I didn't think twice about it, but the compass needle was spinning, not drifting or flickering like when the magnetometer goes bad. Spinning. Smooth, continuous, maybe one full rotation every second. I tried tilting the phone, closing the app, reopening it. It kept doing the same thing. I'd had that phone for years. It had never done that. I opened the regular map app to see if the GPS was back. The blue location dot jumped around the screen like it was glitching. Half a mile north, then off the road entirely, then back near where I actually was, but still pulsing like it couldn't settle. The compass needle spun faster. I felt a tightening in my chest that I tried to brush off as the kind of random anxiety that hits when you're out alone at night in a place that's just quiet enough to feel wrong. Set the phone down and stepped out of the car, partly to see if getting away from the metal frame would calm the magnetometer. The spinning didn't stop. The lot felt bigger once I was standing in it. The dark swallow of the abandoned building behind me felt like it was leaning in. But the sky looked clear, no storms, no clouds, just an empty, moonless stretch of stars. For some reason, the silence felt heavier than it had minutes earlier. I held the phone out in front of me, turning in slow circles to see if the compass responded to my movement. It didn't. The needle just kept looping, steady as a clock hand. That was when the light appeared. A faint flash, white, thin, fast, cut across the sky above me in a perfectly straight line, not like a shooting star. Meteor trails arc or taper or leave slight burns. This was a clean path, like someone dragged a laser pointer across black paper. It lasted less than half a second. My first thought was satellite, but satellites don't streak, they drift. And this wasn't drifting. It was traveling too fast and too sharply. I turned toward the direction it had come from, squinting. The sky looked normal again. If anything, too normal. Then the compass needle stopped, just froze, pointing southeast. Right after that, my car headlights flickered. One short blink, so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The dome light inside the car glowed faintly, even though the door was shut and the engine off. It faded after a second, like a dying battery. But the battery was fine. I'd just had it replaced that summer. I tried unlocking the car with the fob. It didn't respond the first time. The second press worked, but the beep sounded softer than usual, as if something in the background had dampened the sound. I got back in and shut the door. The air inside felt warmer than outside, though I'd turned everything off. I checked the time. 10:43 p.m. I'd only been outside for a minute or two. The compass needle started spinning again. Slower this time, but steady. I held my phone up against the windshield and noticed the spinning seemed to sync weirdly with the faint hum I'd assumed was the highway earlier. Except now the hum didn't sound distant. It sounded close, too close for comfort, like it was reverberating off the roof of the car. I turned the engine on, and my dashboard lights glowed a dull orange before brightening to their normal level. The radio, which always turned on automatically, stayed silent. Just the screen lit up with no station. When I hit the power button, the speakers made a soft popping sound, then went dead again. I didn't want to sit there anymore. I backed up slowly, half expecting the engine to stall or the lights to flicker. Neither happened. As I angled toward the exit, I glanced up at the sky again. Another flash streaked overhead. This one was dimmer but slower, slow enough that I realized it wasn't moving the way an object should. Instead of traveling in a curve or dispersing, the streak held a perfectly even thickness and brightness from one end to the other. It looked artificial, but not in a way I could describe, just clean, like geometry. The compass needle jerked wildly, then froze, pointing straight up before spinning again. I pressed harder on the gas. As I rolled toward the back exit, my headlights washed over the weeds and cracked pavement in those stark white beams that made everything look flat. For a moment, the asphalt seemed to ripple, like heat rising off a road in summer. But the night air was cold. And when I looked again, the pavement was normal. My phone buzzed. A notification I couldn't fully read flashed on the screen. something about calibration failing before disappearing. Then the compass closed itself. The home screen appeared. The signal bars returned. Everything seemed to snap back to normal. The humming stopped. The radio clicked back to life with static. The dashboard lights brightened just slightly, like they'd been dimmed without my noticing. I didn't slow down when I reached the road. I didn't look back at the mall. I just got onto Route 6 and drove until the empty fields turned into houses and street lights and the hum of normal noise returned. But several minutes later, while passing a dark stretch of farmland north of town, my headlights caught something reflective above the road. Quick, small, like a flash of metal or glass. I glanced up just in time to see another faint streak travel across the sky. Slower this time, almost deliberate. My compass app popped open again on its own. The needle pointed straight at it. Then everything went still. The streak faded into nothing, leaving only stars that suddenly looked too ordinary, like they were pretending not to have moved. The compass fixed itself the second the streak disappeared. I didn't open it again for the rest of the night. And even now, months later, sometimes my phone buzzes randomly in quiet places, parking lots, empty roads, wide fields, and the compass needle twitches for no reason I can explain. It always points southeast first, then straight up, then normal again, like nothing happened. I woke up around 3:20 a.m. to my dog Murphy growling at the ceiling. Not barking, he almost never barks, but this low, steady growl he only makes when he's afraid of something he can't place. At first, I thought he was dreaming. He does these little twitchy runs in his sleep sometimes. But when I sat up, he was wide awake, stiff-legged, staring straight up at the corner of the room above the closet. My room was dark except for the faint orange glow from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. The house was quiet. No furnace running, no fridge hum, no passing cars, just Murphy's growl and my own heartbeat starting to pick up. I whispered his name, but he didn't break focus. His ears were rigid and his tail was curled down tight. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing up there. No bug, no shifting shadow, nothing. That's when the light pulsed. It was soft, more like a dim flash than anything bright. It wasn't aimed at the house, and it didn't light up the room or throw any shadows. It just glowed through the curtains in this muted, colorless way, as if someone had held up a frosted bulb outside for a split second. One heartbeat, maybe two. Then it was gone. Murphy stopped growling, but he didn't relax. He just stared at the window now, frozen. I got out of bed and went to the curtain. My foot brushed against the floorboard that always creaks, but even that sound felt dampened somehow. I pressed the curtain aside. The street was empty. The neighbor's house across the way looked normal. The street lamp was steady. No cars were passing. No porch lights were on. The sky was mostly overcast, thin clouds glowing faintly with light pollution. Nothing was bright enough to make that pulse. Murphy whined behind me. I turned back to him and noticed the hair on his spine was raised. The room felt pressurized almost, not warm or cold, just heavier in a way that made my breath come shorter. I tried the window latch just to check it was locked. It was. My fingers tingled against the metal frame like it had a slight charge, but maybe that was just nerves. I stayed there watching for another minute, then let the curtain fall back. The pressure feeling eased. Everything felt normal again. Murphy kept staring at the ceiling for a while, then paced in circles before jumping onto the bed and curling up next to me, still tense. I scratched behind his ears, trying to calm both of us. We lay there quiet for a long time. Just as I was starting to drift off again, I heard a soft clicking noise. It came from the attic. Not loud, just a tiny tap, 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 like something settling. Except my attic doesn't make noises like that. It's mostly insulation and beams. No reason for anything to move on its own. Murphy lifted his head, his ears perked. The tapping stopped. I listened hard. The house was silent again, but my skin felt prickly, like we weren't alone. Murphy pressed closer to me. After several minutes, nothing else happened. I eventually fell asleep with the lamp still on. In the morning, everything felt like a dream until I went downstairs and saw the back door. The deadbolt was locked. The handle was locked. But the security chain, the one I always latch before bed, was unhooked and dangling straight down. I don't forget that chain. It squeaks when I slide it. I tried to tell myself maybe I hadn't latched it, but my stomach knew better. Murphy was on high alert all morning. He wouldn't leave my side, and every few minutes he'd stare upward again, like he was waiting for something. When I took him out in the yard, he kept sniffing the air instead of the grass. Not in his usual curious way, more like he expected something to appear above us. I checked the security camera footage from the front porch and backyard, but there were no motion triggers between midnight and sunrise. The last recording was just a moth fluttering past the lens around 12:50. The next night, I slept with the curtains cracked open a little. I don't know why, maybe to reassure myself nothing unusual was happening outside. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again, not to Murphy this time, but to silence. A perfect, deep silence, like the house had been wrapped in insulation. I couldn't hear the refrigerator, the heater, or even the distant hum of traffic miles away. It felt wrong. Then Murphy's head shot up. He stared at the window, ears forward. No growl this time, just that same rigid attention. A moment later, a faint, just barely visible, swept across the curtains. Not a pulse like the night before. More like a slow movement, a drifting patch of light sliding across the window from left to right. I held my breath. When I moved to get out of bed, the glow disappeared instantly, like whatever caused it noticed me react. The silence in the house deepened, pressing on my ears. I stepped toward the window anyway and pulled the curtain back again. The street was empty, but the clouds overhead looked disturbed, a ripple almost, a thinning, like something had passed through them, erasing a piece of their texture. The clouds parted for a few seconds in a smooth, unnatural way before settling back into place. I stepped back from the window. Murphy let out a low, soft whine and put his paw on my leg. I didn't sleep again that night. The day after that, I checked the attic, even though I dreaded what I might find. There was nothing up there. No signs of animals, no disturbed insulation, no footprints. But as I was climbing down the ladder, I noticed something odd on the floor beneath the hatch, a faint circular mark. Not a stain exactly, more like the hardwood had been pressed by something heavy in a perfect ring. Not deep, not permanent, but visible if you knew where to look. I put my foot next to it for scale. The ring was wider than I expected, too wide for furniture legs, too smooth to be from anything I owned. That night, Murphy refused to sleep upstairs. He kept pacing back and forth between the living room and the hallway, pausing every so often to look upward and sniff at nothing. I tried to go to bed around midnight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting outside, or above, or just beyond the edge of what I could sense. Right as I was drifting off, Murphy barked once, sharp and startled, then ran to the window. I followed him, heart pounding, but when I pulled the curtain aside, there was only the street lamp and the quiet houses. No glow, no motion, nothing. But the moment I stepped away, the room dimmed slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow had passed over the house. Murphy started growling again. I didn't check the window a second time. Whatever it was didn't come back that night. Or maybe it did, and I didn't see it. But now, every time Murphy stares upward in the middle of the night, I brace myself for that soft, impossible glow seeping through the curtains, quiet as a breath, gone before I can reach the window, but unmistakably real. And each time, for just a second, the house feels heavy again, like something unseen is passing overhead. I woke up with my bedside lamp shining straight at the window, not just angled toward it, the shade tilted like someone had purposefully turned it to face outside. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, but even I don't knock a lamp around without waking up. And it wasn't just bumped, it had been rotated. The cord was stretched tight across the nightstand like it had been pulled farther than usual. The glow outside was the next thing I noticed. A pale, milky light lingering near the treetops behind my yard. Not bright enough to illuminate anything, not dim enough to ignore. Just a hovering wash of color sitting above the branches like a low, stalled cloud. But the sky was clear. I could see stars scattered above the glow, untouched by whatever was happening near the trees. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, trying to figure out how my lamp had moved. My heartbeat started climbing in that slow, creeping way where your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the old wall clock, usually ticking loud enough to hear at night, sounded muffled. I pushed the blanket aside and swung my feet onto the floor. The boards were cold, colder than they should have been for early fall. As soon as I stood, the pale glow outside seemed to flicker, like it noticed the movement. I could feel Murphy's absence sharply. He always slept at the foot of the bed, but I'd left him with my friend Aaron for the weekend because I was deep cleaning the house. I wished he were there. I took a few steps toward the window. My shadow stretched across the floor and over the bed, strangely crisp for how faint the light outside was. When I reached the curtain, I pulled it back just an inch with 2 fingers. The glow hovered across the treetops in a wide, shallow arc. It wasn't coming from the ground or a house or a car. It didn't flicker like a fire or vibrate like a drone. It just floated. A diffused, pale band of light sliding slowly along the tops of the spruce trees as if trapped there. My porch light wasn't on. The street was dark, and I knew, absolutely knew, that nothing in my neighborhood could cause that color. It wasn't white, not blue. More like the inside of a seashell when you hold it up to the sun. Soft and flat at the same time. I opened the curtain a little wider and pressed my forehead to the cold glass. The glow shifted, not away from me, upward, like whatever was creating it had lifted slightly. The shape changed too, stretching taller, narrowing at the edges. I squinted, trying to see if something physical was causing it. A mist? A reflection? But there was nothing to reflect. No fog. No dew. No beams of light leading to a source. The glow moved again. A slow, steady drift to the right, following the line of the trees as if scanning them. That was when I noticed the sound. A faint, rhythmic clicking coming from inside the house. Close. Too close. I turned away from the window so fast the curtain swung. The clicking was coming from my closet. Soft, irregular tap, tap, tap noises, almost like someone gently flicking the door from the inside. The glow outside dimmed for a moment, then brightened again. I stepped backward until my calves hit the bed. The clicking stopped instantly, like it had been waiting for me to get closer before it decided to pause. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, keeping my eyes locked on the closet door. It took a few tries to grab it because my hands were shaking harder than I wanted to admit. The screen lit up, too bright in the darkness, and my reflection looked pale and washed out. No notifications, no missed calls, no emergency alerts that could explain anything. I opened the camera and pointed it at the window. The glow showed up, but weaker, almost like the camera couldn't fully register it. I zoomed in. The light shimmered slightly in the display, like heat on pavement. Still no shape, no edges. I switched the camera to the closet door. Before the lens could focus, the door rattled once, a tiny vibration, enough to knock one of my hanging jackets inside. I heard the faint swish. I nearly dropped the phone. I told myself it was the house settling, even though the house only settles in winter and never at 3 in the morning and never loud enough to move objects. The pale glow outside brightened again, noticeably like someone had turned up a dimmer switch. The room itself didn't brighten, but the edges of the curtain lit faintly, casting a soft, warped bar of light across the carpet. I walked back to the window because somehow that felt safer than looking at the closet another second. This time when I pulled the curtain aside, the glow was closer. About 20 feet above the treetops now, and shifting horizontally with smoother motion than before. I thought I could make out a darker shape at the center of the light, but every time I tried to focus on it, the glow seemed to smear around it like a smudged lens. The wind picked up suddenly. Not much, just a thin breeze, but it moved only the trees below the glow. The branches swayed, but the air around my house stayed still. I touched the window, ice cold. The glow paused, held still, then it rose, straight up. No curve, no drift, just a clean vertical lift like gravity didn't matter. Higher and higher until it slipped behind a cloud and became a muted halo. The cloud itself brightened from within for a moment, then dimmed as the light faded. I stood there long after it disappeared, waiting for it to return. When I finally turned away from the window, the closet door was open an inch. I hadn't heard it move. I stared at the gap, forcing myself to walk over and push the door wide open. The light switch snapped on. Shoes, coats, vacuum, nothing out of place, no sign anything had been disturbed. But on the inside of the door, near the bottom where Murphy sometimes paws, was a new mark. A thin, pale streak that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. Not scratched, not drawn. More like a residue, almost the same color as the glow outside. I touched it with one finger. It felt like dry air, cool and powdery without leaving anything on my skin. I shut the closet door and backed away. The lamp was still pointed at the window. I fixed it, turning it back toward the bed, but the shade wobbled loosely like a screw inside had been stripped. It had never done that before. When I finally lay down again, I kept the lamp on. Sleep wasn't an option. Every creak, every shifting shadow made my heart lurch. The glow didn't return, but every so often the room dimmed or brightened by the slightest fraction, as if the light outside was passing somewhere far, far off. Just before dawn, I got up and looked out again. The treetops were normal. The street lamp flickered faintly the way it always did when the bulb was dying. Birds were beginning to move. Everything looked like any other morning, but that the lamp on my nightstand, still warm, still slightly crooked, felt like proof that something had been in the room with me before I woke, something that had wanted the window lit, something that had wanted to see inside. I was staying at my cousin Matt's coastal cabin in Oregon for a long weekend, something I'd been meaning to do since he bought the place the year before. It sat halfway up a bluff overlooking the ocean, not fancy, just an old cedar-sided place with a deck that faced the water. The beach below wasn't the kind you swim at, steep, rocky, dangerous in winter, but the view was unreal. That Friday night, I stayed up later than Matt, who went to bed around 10 because he had an early fishing trip planned. I wasn't tired, so I sat out on the deck with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening to the waves hit the rocks in this slow, heavy rhythm. The sky was clear, except for a few low clouds hugging the horizon. The moon was somewhere behind me, hidden by the bluff, so the ocean looked almost black. Every so often, the foam caught the faintest glint from a porch light down the coastline, but mostly it was just darkness and sound. I'd been out there maybe 40 minutes when I first noticed the light. It was far out. So far, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Just a small, bright point hovering above the waterline. It reminded me of when fishing boats use those strong deck lights, the kind that reflect silver across the waves. But this one wasn't reflecting anything. The water beneath it stayed dark. I leaned forward, squinting. The light didn't move. It didn't bob or drift like a boat. It stayed perfectly still, maybe a few degrees above the horizon. After about 10 seconds, it pulsed. Not brighter, just fuller, like it expanded a little, then contracted again. I told myself it had to be a distant ship, maybe a research vessel, maybe a buoy with an unusually strong LED. Anything normal. But the more I watched it, the less it acted like anything I'd seen on that coastline. The light drifted slowly upward. Not like a flare. Flares arc, and they fade, and they wobble. This moved in a straight vertical line, smooth and deliberate. It rose maybe 20 or 30 feet before stopping again. The water below remained untouched. No shimmer, no reflection, no indication that anything bright existed in the sky above it. I stood up from the deck chair without meaning to. The air felt heavier. Not windy, not cold, just dense, like the atmosphere thickened a little around me. Even the waves sounded quieter for a moment. The light pulsed again, a few feet higher now. I reached back and slid the deck door open just a crack, ready to wake Matt if I needed to. But I couldn't make myself call out. The situation felt too vague, too unreal to speak out loud. Part of me was scared I'd break whatever fragile boundary existed between noticing something strange and acknowledging it. The light rose again, this time faster. Up into the thin layer of clouds that had been hanging above the horizon. The cloud lit faintly from within, a diffuse glow that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the brightness faded, swallowed by the cloud. No streak, no trail, no spark. Just gone. I waited for it to reappear on the other side of the cloud, the way a plane or helicopter would. Nothing emerged. The sky returned to its normal dark. I let out a shaky breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. The ocean stayed loud for a while, steady and familiar, as if reclaiming the silence the light had taken from it. I stayed on the deck, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. My eyes kept catching imaginary glints, bits of moonlight or reflections on the sliding door. But nothing solid appeared. After a few minutes, I decided to go inside, figuring I'd spooked myself. But before I closed the sliding door, something else caught my attention. The waves near shore had changed, not in a huge way, no sudden swell, no crash out of rhythm, but the pattern felt off, too uniform. The breaks came at almost identical intervals, like they were being metronomed. I leaned out slightly and listened hard. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each wave sounded spaced almost exactly the same, like the ocean had fallen into a mechanical rhythm. I stepped back out onto the deck. The air pressure shifted again. Soft, like a faint pop inside my ears, the waves continued their pattern. 5, 6, 7. Then the eighth wave hit late, a little delayed, and when it did, the entire rhythm dissolved back into its usual uneven crashing. I stood still, waiting for anything else strange to happen. Nothing did. The air felt lighter again. I ducked inside and shut the door gently. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bright dot rising silently into the clouds, leaving no trace. Around 5 in the morning, I heard Matt moving around in the kitchen. I joined him, bleary and unfocused. He asked if I was up early or hadn't slept. I said I didn't sleep well. He made a joke about the cabin mattress being older than he was. I almost told him what I'd seen. I opened my mouth twice to try, but the words felt wrong. Not embarrassing, exactly. Just fragile. Like saying it would make it false somehow. When he left for his fishing trip and the sun finally came up, I walked back out onto the deck. The ocean looked normal, gray-blue, restless, uncaring. No pattern to the waves beyond the usual scattered rhythm. No ship lights on the horizon, no signs of anything at all. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. On the wet railing of the deck, slightly glistening from the morning mist, was a faint ring of dryness. A perfect circle, maybe 3 inches wide, as if something warm had rested there long enough to evaporate the moisture in that exact shape. I touched it. The wood felt the same temperature as everything else. By the time Matt returned around noon, the circle had vanished into the general dampness of the day. I didn't mention it. I stayed one more night, but I couldn't relax on the deck again. Every time I glanced toward the horizon after sunset, I half expected the light to reappear. Hovering in that impossible stillness, ignoring the water beneath it, waiting just long enough to see if I'd react. It never came back. But sometimes when I drive home from work along the coastline, I catch myself checking the sky above the ocean, just in case something bright decides to rise where nothing should be rising at all. I was out behind my apartment complex when it happened, standing in the patchy grass by the dumpsters, trying to coax my neighbor's cat down from the fence. It was around 11, cool for early September, and the moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. The cat, a skittish, orange thing named Murphy, had bolted from the stairwell when I opened the door and climbed the fence like he'd been training for it. His owner, Dave, was out of town for the week, and I'd promised to look after him. I had just gotten Murphy's attention. He was making that weird chirping noise cats do at bugs when the light changed. Not dimmed, not brightened, just changed, like someone had quietly adjusted the color temperature of the night without asking permission. I looked up at the moon. It was high and full, clean white against a clear sky, and then something slid across it. I didn't see where it started, only the moment it entered the frame of the moon's glow. A dark shape, drifting slowly, no sound, no fluttering, no change in outline. Too smooth to be a bird, too big, too steady. It crossed from right to left, blocking a perfect crescent of the moon for maybe 2 seconds. Then it slipped off the other side and vanished into the darkness. Murphy hissed. A low, tiny hiss, like he wasn't sure he wanted to commit to being upset. My first thought was, drone, but it hadn't moved like one. No blinking, no dipping or rising, no buzzing. It had been more like a shadow passing under a street lamp. Except the street lamp was the moon, and the shadow had been huge. I stared at the empty patch of sky for a few seconds. Nothing. The moon looked normal again. The air felt normal. The only sound was a car turning into the parking lot behind the building. Murphy jumped off the fence and bolted toward the stairs. I followed, not running, but walking faster than usual. Inside my apartment, I turned off the lights and went straight to the sliding balcony door. I pulled the blinds apart with 2 fingers and looked up at the moon again, expecting I don't know what. A second pass, maybe? Some lingering outline. But the sky was clear. I stood there for a while, watching. Nothing moved except a few bats near the trees by the creek. I told myself to let it go. It was late. Maybe my depth perception was off. Maybe it was just a goose flying higher than it looked. I made some tea, fed Murphy, opened my laptop, tried to distract myself. It didn't work. Around midnight, I went back outside. Not because I wanted to see something again, but because avoiding it felt worse. The air was colder than before. There was a breeze now carrying that damp, earthy smell from the creek. I walked out to the edge of the parking lot where the streetlights didn't reach. The moon was still bright, still high, no shadows in front of it. I stayed out there for a few minutes, breathing slowly, listening. A few cicadas, a car on the highway a mile away. Nothing strange. Then, just as I was about to go inside, the breeze stopped. Not faded, stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The leaves on the trees froze mid-rustle. The air settled unnaturally fast into a kind of heavy stillness. I could hear my own breathing again. Something in the sky dimmed. Not the moon this time, but the stars to the left of it. 3 or 4 of them faded a little, then brightened again a second later, almost like something had passed in front of them and kept going. I didn't move. I didn't even think to. I just stared up, waiting for another sign of movement. Another shadow. Another dimming. Nothing. I went inside and locked the balcony door, which I never did. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I woke up, I checked the ceiling like I expected light patterns to be there. Nothing ever was, but the feeling stuck with me. The next night, I walked Murphy before bed. He liked the routine, and so did I, usually. It was windy this time, and the moon was half hidden by fast-moving clouds. I was trying to fix one of Murphy's jingly toys that had snagged on the leash when I felt something. Felt, not heard. The air pressure shifted again. Not enough to hurt, just enough to notice. Like the atmosphere briefly stretched or compressed. Murphy stopped walking. His head snapped upward. Every muscle in his little body went rigid. His tail puffed so fast it startled me. I followed his gaze. The clouds above us were sliding east, thick and layered. And between 2 of those layers, for a brief moment, something darker moved. Not the color of a cloud. Clouds have texture, edges, thickness. This thing was uniform, smooth. A flat shape gliding across. It wasn't lit. It wasn't reflecting anything. It was just dark. The same darkness I'd seen pass over the moon the night before, but this time it was above my building, close enough that I could judge its size. Bigger than I'd thought, much bigger. It moved slower than the clouds, drifting on a different path, and then the clouds folded over it, and it was gone. The wind resumed instantly. Murphy bolted so hard I nearly dropped the leash. I rushed him inside. I didn't even take off my shoes. I sat on the floor of the living room with him hiding under the coffee table, staring at the sliding door like something was going to press its face, or whatever, against it. I checked the time, 12:41 a.m. I don't know why that number stuck with me, but it did. I went to the bedroom and opened the curtains. The sky looked normal again. The moon peeked through the clouds, no shadows, no shapes. I didn't sleep much. 2 nights later, I woke to a thump outside. Not loud, not metallic, more like someone had gently bumped the siding of the building. I checked the window again. Normal. But after I lay down, the room brightened faintly for half a second. A soft silver glow brushed across the wall, not from the moon, not from a passing car. This was angled wrong, too high, too soft. I sat up, heart hammering. Murphy leapt onto the bed, trembling. The glow faded instantly, gone as if it had never happened. I moved slowly to the window. The glass felt cold, colder than the room. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. The streetlights were steady. No strange reflections. The sky calm. The next morning, everything looked perfectly normal. I walked to the coffee shop down the block, trying to convince myself nothing had happened. Sunlight, traffic, people, all of it grounding and ordinary. I almost believed myself. But as I sat outside drinking my coffee, a plane crossed overhead. Small passenger jet heading toward the city. I followed it with my eyes. For half an instant, the plane disappeared behind nothing. Not a cloud, there were none. Not a glare spot, it wasn't bright enough. It just slipped behind a shape I couldn't see, a subtle distortion in the blue sky, something transparent but present. Then it came back into view. No one else reacted. I didn't say anything. Now, weeks later, the nights feel normal again. Murphy acts like himself. I haven't seen any shadows cross the moon or shapes slipping between clouds. But I do check. Every night, without meaning to, I step onto the balcony and look at the moon for a few seconds. I wait for something to drift across it, too silent, too smooth, too big. Nothing ever does. But sometimes, just before I turn away, the light around it shifts for a moment. Just a moment. Then it's gone. I first noticed it half a block after leaving the hardware store where I worked. It had been a long, late shift, inventory night, and my head was already buzzing from fluorescent lights and dust. I remember thinking the sound was just in my ears at first, like the leftover ring you get after being around loud equipment. But when I stopped to adjust my jacket zipper, the buzzing cut out instantly. Not faded. Stopped. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. Traffic was light, just a few cars rolling down Maple Street. Somewhere a dog barked twice. Nothing unusual. I shrugged it off and kept walking. The buzzing started again the moment my foot hit the pavement. It wasn't loud and it wasn't sharp, more like a faint electrical hum, almost soothing if it hadn't been so strangely timed. It seemed to sit somewhere above me, not directly overhead, but close, like it was following at an angle. I stopped again. Total silence. I started walking. The hum returned, matching my pace exactly. My name is Lucas, by the way. I've lived my whole life in the same mid-sized town in central Colorado. I walked home most nights because it cleared my head and because parking downtown was terrible. The route I took was familiar. Maple to Edison, Edison to my apartment on Birch. Quiet neighborhoods, big old cottonwoods lining the sidewalks, street lights that flickered sometimes but never fully died. That night, the air was cold and still. Not windy at all, which made the buzzing even weirder. I tried slowing my pace to see if the sound changed with speed. It didn't. The hum stayed steady, soft, but undeniably there. Halfway down Maple, I turned and looked behind me. No one was on the sidewalk. A single car passed, engine whining faintly, then disappeared around the bend. I looked up, expecting maybe a power line transformer acting up, but the wires overhead were just wires, dark against the evening sky. No sparks, no flickering. I kept walking, not because I wasn't freaked out, but because stopping made the silence feel heavier. The buzzing followed me. By the time I reached Edison Street, the sound had shifted a little, still soft, but with a subtle pulse to it now, like a distant engine revving in slow, even breaths. One rise, one fall, repeat. I walked under a street lamp, and for a second the buzz dipped in pitch, as if whatever caused it didn't like the light. I stopped again under the lamp. Silence. I stepped out of the circle of light. The buzzing resumed immediately. My heart was pounding. I kept my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets so I wouldn't look as shaken as I felt, even though no one was around to see. A few houses down, a sensor porch light flicked on as I passed. At the exact same moment, the buzzing stuttered, just for half a second, and then continued. That porch light had always been touchy, snapping on for dogs and raccoons, but I had never heard a sound react to it before. Something about that made the situation feel more real, more directed. I crossed the street just to put some space between me and the houses, but the buzzing followed without hesitation. Birch Street was darker, fewer streetlights, wider gaps. Most people kept their curtains drawn at night. My apartment building sat at the far end, a squat two-story place with peeling paint and mismatched mailboxes. The buzzing grew faint as I approached, but it didn't stop. It felt like it was coming from a distinct point above me now, not diffused like before. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see a drone or a helicopter, something with a blinking light or rotors or any sign of movement. There was nothing. The sky was clear, stars sharp, the moon a thin curved slice. No clouds, no motion, just a faint, steady hum keeping pace with me. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the stairs. The buzzing was still there, but softer now, as if whatever was causing it was drifting back or up. I took the steps slowly. The sound dimmed further with each step. And the moment I reached the landing and stepped under the covered walkway outside my apartment door, it stopped completely. I stood there for a while, listening. Nothing. Just the muted hum of my neighbor's fridge through the wall. I went inside, locked the door, and sat on the couch without turning on the lights. I waited. I don't know what I expected, another sound, a vibration, headlights sweeping across the blinds, but nothing happened. About an hour later, curiosity got the better of me. I cracked open the door and leaned out. The street was still and empty. No wind, no cars, no hum. I went to bed eventually, but sleep came in short bursts. Every time I turned over, I listened for the buzzing. The next morning, walking to work, everything was normal again. No sound above me, no weird pulsing feeling in the air. I told myself it must have been electrical noise from a transformer or a malfunctioning security device on one of the houses. Something normal, even if the timing didn't make sense. 2 nights later, the buzzing returned. This time, it started halfway down Edison Street before I'd even crossed to Birch. Same pitch, same faint pressure behind it, hovering somewhere just overhead. I froze, and the buzzing quit instantly. I stepped forward, gingerly. The hum resumed. I felt my pulse in my throat. I turned in place, watching my shadow shift under the street lamp. For a moment, it looked stretched, like the light wasn't hitting me quite right, but I couldn't be sure. I forced myself to look up again. Nothing, just the blank sky. I walked the rest of the way home faster than usual, half expecting the buzzing to grow louder or closer, but it stayed the same distance above me, like something maintaining a precise position. When I reached the covered landing again, the sound stopped dead, totally silent, as before. Inside my apartment, I sat by the window and watched the patch of sky above the parking lot. For nearly an hour, there was nothing. The night was ordinary, wind in the trees, headlights sweeping by every now and then. At exactly 11:52, time burned into my mind because I checked the clock twice. The buzzing started again, but I wasn't moving. I was sitting perfectly still. I froze, listening. The hum wasn't overhead this time. It was outside, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the parking lot, drifting slowly from left to right. It pulsed like before, soft rise, soft fall, repeating in rhythm. I crouched down so my silhouette wouldn't show in the window. The buzzing passed in front of the lot, paused for a moment, then lifted upward with this strange smoothness. I didn't see anything, just heard the sound moving as if something invisible was shifting through the air. The buzzing faded, then silence. I didn't sleep until dawn. After that night, the sound didn't return for over a week. Nothing strange happened at all. I thought maybe whatever caused it had moved on, or broken, or been shut off by someone somewhere. Life went back to its usual rhythms. Then one evening, walking home in a light drizzle, I felt the pressure shift again. It wasn't noise this time, not at first, more like the air above me thickened. Then the buzzing began, so faint I almost mistook it for rain hitting power lines. Except it pulsed just like before. I stopped walking. The buzzing stopped. I moved again. It resumed. I felt this unease rise in my chest that I can't fully describe. Not panic. Just the sense that something was paying very close attention to the exact moments I did or didn't move. At Birch Street, right before my building, the sound drifted slightly ahead of me, and to the right, like whatever was producing it was shifting position, anticipating where I was going. I slowed. The buzz slowed. I sped up. It matched me. When I reached the stairs, the buzzing didn't stop immediately this time. It lingered overhead, steady and patient, like it was deciding something. Then, quiet. I went inside, locked the door, sat on the floor. Nothing else happened that night. The buzzing hasn't followed me for over a month now. I tell myself it was electrical interference or some strange atmospheric thing tied to the geography. Something boring. Something normal. But sometimes when I'm walking home and the street goes quiet, I catch myself listening for that soft rise and fall above me. And on rare nights when the wind completely dies, I swear I can feel the air grow heavier for just a second, like something is there, matching my pace, waiting for me to notice. My smartwatch vibrated for the third time before I even made it to the end of my street. At first, I assumed it was just some glitch. Maybe I'd forgotten to clear a notification or the haptics were acting up again. It had done weird things before after getting splashed during a run, so didn't think much of it. But when I lifted my wrist, the screen was blank. No messages, no reminders, no health alerts, just the time glowing at me like nothing was wrong. I shook my wrist a little and kept walking. The vibration stopped for about 10 seconds. Then it buzzed again. 2 short taps against my skin, the exact pattern it used for incoming texts. I sighed and muttered to myself, "Come on, don't die on me now," and raised my wrist again. Still nothing on the display. It was just after 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, dry, cool, early fall. I was walking back from my friend Andrea's place a few blocks over. She'd asked me to help her move a bookshelf down a flight of stairs, which turned into helping her rearrange half her living room. I was tired, and I just wanted to get home, microwave leftover pasta, and zone out in front of a show. My neighborhood was quiet. Suburban, but older. Large maple trees, uneven sidewalks, houses set back behind hedges and low fences. A few porch lights were on, but most places were dark. The sky was clear, except for a thin scatter of clouds drifting toward the horizon. Good visibility. The kind of night when you could see every star that wasn't drowned out by street lamps. My watch buzzed again. Harder this time. Longer vibration, like an alarm. I stopped under a corner streetlight and swiped the screen. Nothing. I held down the button to check for system errors. Still nothing. The watch was acting like it was perfectly normal, but also like it was desperately trying to get my attention. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. The second happened a few seconds later when I noticed the speck of light above the street. I don't know how long it had been there before I noticed it. It wasn't bright, not like a plane or a drone or even a satellite. Just a faint, dim point, no bigger than a star. But it was low. Much too low to be anything astronomical. My first thought was that it was the tip of a radio tower, but there were no towers anywhere near that part of town, and it was sitting perfectly still above the intersection ahead of me. Not blinking, not moving, just hanging there. My watch buzzed twice. I looked from the watch to the light, from the light back to the watch. My heartbeat picked up in this uncomfortable, crawling way. I couldn't shake the feeling the two things were connected. Not in any logical sense, but in the way you just know something's wrong before you have proof. I took a few slow steps forward. The light didn't shift. It didn't flicker. It didn't react at all. But my watch buzzed again. 3 sharp pulses. Not any pattern I recognized. I turned in a slow circle, checking for headlights, security lights, electrical transformers, anything that might be throwing some kind of reflection. There was nothing unusual. Just empty street, evenly spaced lamps, silent houses. No movement except the slight rustling of leaves overhead. I thought about calling Andrea, but I felt silly. What would I even say? Hey, my watch is spazzing out and there's a dot in the sky? No way. Instead, I kept walking. Every few seconds, my watch vibrated. Some pulses were short, some long, some felt almost hesitant. It reminded me of someone tapping their finger on a desk while deciding whether to speak. When I reached the intersection, the speck of light hung right above the 4-way stop. Maybe 100 feet up, maybe less. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything below it. The pavement looked exactly as it always did. Smooth patches, cracked patches, a faded crosswalk symbol. Nothing unusual. But the light looked close. Closer than any star had a right to be. My watch buzzed so hard it startled me. I flinched and almost dropped my arm. This time, when I checked the screen, it was glowing white. Just a blank white screen, no icons, no numbers, no backlight bleed, perfectly uniform. I tapped it, swiped, held the button, nothing changed. And the light above me dimmed. Not all at once, more like a slow fade as if someone was turning a knob. I stepped back instinctively, expecting it to blink out or drop lower or reveal some shape around it. Instead, it hovered there, barely visible, then brightened again, back to its original faint glow. My throat tightened. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I forced myself to look away from the light and check around the intersection again. No cars, no people, not even a stray cat or cyclist. Just a quiet residential street and that point of dim illumination hanging above it. My watch buzzed in one long, continuous vibration. I lifted it toward my face and the buzzing stopped instantly. The screen stayed white. Then very slowly it faded back to the regular time display. 9:14 p.m. Like nothing had happened. I didn't move for a long moment. Just listened. Waited. My watch stayed quiet. I forced myself to walk. Not fast, but steady. 1 foot after the other. I kept my peripheral vision locked on the light, trying not to look directly at it, but needing to know if it moved. It stayed overhead. I rounded the corner onto my street. The light drifted slightly, not downward, not sideways exactly, more like it repositioned itself to stay aligned with me. The movement was so smooth I almost doubted I saw it, like a trick of my eyes. My watch buzzed once. Short, sharp. I broke into a faster walk. Halfway down my block, the light finally moved. It rose, straight upward. Not fast, just steadily climbing through the air. The higher it got, the dimmer it looked, until it was impossible to tell whether it had disappeared or simply blended in with the stars. By the time I reached my driveway, it was gone. My watch didn't vibrate again for the rest of the night. Inside my house, I sat on the couch with the watch off my wrist, set, on the coffee table like it might do something if I looked away. It didn't. It stayed on, functioning normally. I restarted it twice, no glitches, no phantom notifications. Later, when I lay in bed, I replayed the walk over and over, trying to rationalize the whole thing. Maybe it really was a drone, one with a very weak light and a completely silent motor, or a satellite caught at a strange angle, or some atmospheric trick, and the buzzing was a coincidence or an electrical issue. Those explanations should have made me feel better. They didn't, because sometimes when I'm halfway to work or the grocery store or Andrea's house, the watch gives one single, unprompted buzz. Just one. And every instinct I have makes me check the sky. I was somewhere between Wausian and Napoleon when the radio went dead. 1 second, it was some late-night call-in show out of Toledo, the host talking over a guy from Bowling Green about gas prices, and the next, it was just gone. No static, no fade-out. Just a flat, empty silence that didn't even sound like the normal quiet between stations. I glanced down at the display. The station number was still there, the volume bar still halfway up. I nudged the knob anyway. Nothing changed. Great, I muttered, more to fill the space than anything else. It was close to midnight. Late July. Northern Ohio. The kind of humid summer night where the air feels thick even with the windows up and the AC on low. I was on County Road 13, the back way to my parents' place, because I'd left my buddy Nate's house too late and wanted to avoid the highway patrol. The world outside the headlights was just corn and soybeans and the occasional dark shape of a barn. No towns for a few miles, no gas stations, no other cars either. The last pair of headlights I'd seen had been 10 minutes earlier, coming the opposite direction. I tapped the radio off and back on. Still nothing. Not even static when I spun the dial. Instead, a faint tone began. It came in underneath the dead silence like somebody had slid a tiny tuning fork inside the speakers. One soft, pure note. Not high enough to be painful, not low enough to feel like a vibration. Just a thin, clean tone that pulsed in a slow rhythm. On, off, off. I checked the display again. No station name, just FM 97.3 frozen there. When I twisted the knob to change it, the numbers moved, but the tones stayed. Same volume, same pattern, completely unaffected. The hair on the back of my neck stirred. I told myself it was some weird capacitor issue or a loose wire screwing with the audio. I'd bought the car used. The stereo already had quirks. Still, the timing of it felt strange. The tone pulsed at almost exactly the same tempo as my heartbeat. I tested it, held my fingers to my wrist, counting silently. 1 pulse, 2, 3. The tone lined up for several beats, then drifted slightly, then lined up again. Not perfect, but close enough that I noticed. I turned the radio off entirely. The tone kept going. That's when my stomach finally flipped. The display went completely black, as if it had lost power, and the rest of the dash dimmed for half a second before returning to normal. Check engine lights stayed off, RPMs steady, temperature fine. Everything looked normal except for the dark radio screen and that thin, rhythmic tone still coming from the speakers. I cracked the window to see if the sound was actually in my head. Warm, damp air pushed in, carrying the smell of manure and cut grass. Crickets droned faintly in the distance. No tone. When I rolled the window back up, I heard it again. Clear as before. On, off. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and focused on the road. The cornfields on either side loomed high, taller than the car, blocking out any view of farmhouses beyond them. Every so often, I'd pass a break in the rows where a dirt lane cut through. Each time, my headlights would briefly wash over a mailbox or a metal gate before the corn walls closed in again. A few minutes went by like that. Just the hum of the engine and that soft, unnatural beeping in my ears. Then the tone changed. It doubled in speed, still soft, but the pulses now closer together. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had turned a dial inside my head. At the exact same moment, the fields opened up. I came to a long stretch where the land dipped away from the road into a broad, flat expanse planted with soy. The plants were low enough that I could see all the way across the field to the tree line and the old power lines that marched along the horizon like sharp black stitches. And there, ahead and slightly to the right, hovering over the field, was a dull red light. I saw it first as a smudge above the soybeans, like the end of a cigarette held in the dark. Then, as I got closer and the angle changed, it sharpened into a solid shape. Not perfectly round, not a point like a star, but more like the fuzzy circle you see when you stare at an LED through frosted glass. It hung maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, motionless. No blinking, no strobing, no beam, just a steady, muted red that didn't spill onto anything below it. I eased off the gas without realizing it. My speed dropped from 55 to 40, then to 35. The car felt too fast no matter what I did. My focus tunneled onto that light. The tone in the speakers shifted again, lowering in pitch slightly, still rhythmic, still detached from anything I did. I reached for my phone in the cup holder. The screen refused to turn on. The haptic buzz came through under my thumb, but the display stayed black like the backlight had died. No glow, no icons, nothing. I held the power button. Nothing changed. "Come on," I whispered. The red light grew larger in the windshield as I approached. It stayed the same color, the same intensity. Dirt lanes branched off on both sides, empty and dark. No parked trucks, no yard lights, no signs of a farmhouse connected to that field. When I drew nearly parallel with the light, I realized how wrong it was. There was no reflection. The soybeans underneath it were just dark shapes in the wash of my headlights. The light didn't touch them at all. It didn't touch the road either. It was as if the air around it was the only thing allowed to participate. My instincts started screaming at me, but my body lagged behind, caught between wanting to slow down and wanting to floor it. I ended up settling somewhere in the middle, creeping past at maybe 20 miles an hour, eyes locked on the side window now. The red light remained exactly where it was, perfectly still, hovering over the field about 50 yards out. The tone in the speakers grew more insistent, not louder, just more present, like it was pressing against the inside of my ears. On, off, on, off, on, off. I could hear my own breathing now over the sound of the tires on asphalt. It sounded too loud in the small car. For 1 second, everything lined up, the car moving slowly forward, the empty road, the shadowy field, and that unnatural flat red glow hanging in the middle of it all. Then it shot upward, no ramp up, no acceleration, just instantaneous motion like someone had cut a frame out of reality. One moment it was there over the field, the next it was a streak zipping straight into the sky. A vertical smear of red, thin and impossibly fast, disappearing into the low clouds without ever bending or curving. The clouds themselves lit faintly from within, where the streak vanished. The glow spread out in a soft circle, then shrank back to normal gray. The tone cut out mid-pulse. Silence slammed into the car. Real silence, with only the engine and the faint hiss of tires left. My ears rang with the absence of that sound. I realized my foot had lifted fully off the gas. The car was coasting. I forced myself to look away from the rearview mirror where I'd been expecting to still see some trace of red. There was nothing, just the empty road behind and the dark smear of field. I pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb. 30, 40, 50. Off to my right, the brittle silhouettes of corn stalks rose again as the fields changed back from soy to tall crops. The tunnel closed in around me. For a few miles, I didn't dare glance at the sky. Eventually, curiosity or stupidity won out. I flicked my eyes upward through the windshield. The clouds looked ordinary. No glowing shapes. No strange holes. No streaks. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I grabbed it so fast, I almost dropped it. The screen lit up normally, full brightness, icons all where they should be. A flood of delayed notifications came in. Group chat, email, a weather alert about possible fog after midnight. I opened the Compass app without really knowing why. The little arrow spun twice, then settled. North was north again. I turned the radio back on. It came to life at normal volume, the call-in host droning about city council drama like nothing had happened. I spun the dial. Every station I hit was exactly where it should be, with normal static between them. I kept going until I reached the highway. When I pulled into my parents' driveway half an hour later, the porch light was on and the house looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. My mom's ceramic rooster still sat lopsided on the front step. The maple tree still leaned slightly over the garage. Nothing felt any different out there. The sky was just sky. Inside, my dad was half asleep in his recliner with some late-night news show murmuring in the background. He glanced at the clock and asked if the drive had been okay. I heard myself say, "Yeah, fine," like I'd rehearsed it. It wasn't until I was alone in the guest room that I checked the time on my phone again. 12:07 a.m. The dashboard clock in my car had said 11:58 when I pulled into the driveway. I know because I looked, surprised I made it before midnight. 9 minutes difference. My car clock had always been dead on. I checked it compulsively against my phone on longer drives. Maybe it had just drifted. Maybe I'd misread it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a passing train. Every time headlights swept the guest room curtains, my heart lurched, waiting to see a dull red instead of the normal white and yellow. Nothing strange happened the rest of the night. But a few weeks later, driving home along a different stretch of county road at dusk, the radio flickered. Just once. Just enough for one soft, familiar tone to slip through between songs. A single pulse, so faint I could almost pretend I'd imagined it. Then everything went back to normal and the sky above the fields stayed empty. I found the warm rock about 2 hours into the hike. It was late October in northern New Mexico up in the Sangre de Cristos. I'd started from the ski basin trailhead around noon, planning to make it to a little overlook I liked and back down before dark. The weather had been clear when I parked. Bright sun, cold air, that thin, dry wind you only get at altitude. There were a few cars at the trailhead, but by the time I passed the first mile marker, I hadn't seen anyone for a while. The higher I climbed, the colder it got. Patches of old snow clung to the shaded side of the trail, and my breath came out in white puffs. The sun went behind some thin clouds, and the temperature dropped another few degrees. My fingers stung where they stuck out of my gloves. I remember thinking I should have brought a thicker hat. I was blowing into my hands and flexing them when my boot hit a patch of bare rock that felt wrong. Imagine stepping from cold tile to a heated floor. That quick little shock. That's what it felt like, except it was a chunk of granite wedged into the trail at 10,000 feet with frost around its edges. I stopped and stepped back, then forward again to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Same thing. The rock, about 3 feet long and maybe 2 feet wide, was warm. Not hot enough to burn, just like it had been sitting in direct sun on a summer day instead of in the shade of a cluster of pines. I looked up, half expecting a shaft of sunlight to be hitting it through the branches, but the canopy above that stretch was solid. No direct sun. Everything else around was crusted with thin ice. Melted snow had refrozen in little glassy patches off to the side. I squatted down and pressed my gloved hand flat to the rock, warm even through the glove. I pulled the glove off and touched it with my bare fingers. Definitely warm. Not steaming, not glowing, just wrong for where it was. A little uncomfortable feeling slid down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the rock had some kind of mineral that held heat better, or maybe water running under it was warmer. I didn't know. I'm not a geologist. But the air around it was cold and my knees were starting to ache from crouching there. I stood up and took a step back to get a better look at the whole section. That's when I noticed the sky. Directly above that stretch of trail, through a gap in the branches, the sky looked warped. It was subtle. If I hadn't been staring straight up, I might not have seen it at all. But there was this faint shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. The blue behind it wobbled, bending slightly. There was no jet, no contrail, nothing that should have caused it. I moved a couple of steps to the left. The shimmer stayed over that same patch of trail. I moved to the right, same thing. I walked forward, past the warm rock, and looked up again. The distortion was behind me now, parked over the place I'd just been standing. The wind died down, not completely, but enough that the trees around me stopped creaking. It was suddenly very quiet. No birds, no distant road noise, no other hikers. I could hear my own breathing and the faint rush of blood in my ears. I stepped back onto the warm rock. The air around my legs got maybe a degree or two warmer. Not by much, but enough to notice. The hair on my arms lifted under my jacket like static was building. My phone buzzed in my pocket, which made me jump. I pulled it out. No notification, no call. The screen showed the time, 2:08 p.m., and the battery icon flickered from 68% down to 52%, held there, then slowly crawled back up to 64%. The GPS icon flashed once and then disappeared, even though I had airplane mode on. I backed off the rock again. As soon as my boots hit dirt, the air felt normal cold. The static sensation vanished. The phone screen stabilized at 63% like nothing had happened. I laughed a little under my breath, a short, nervous sound, and told myself I was imagining it. High altitude, low blood sugar, whatever. I took a drink of water, ate half a granola bar, and decided to keep going. It was weird, but I didn't have a better explanation, and standing there, staring at a piece of stone, wasn't going to change anything. As I walked away, I checked over my shoulder a few times. The rock looked like any other rock. The sky above it still had that slight ripple, but as the trail curved, branches blocked my view, and eventually I lost sight of it. About 10 minutes later, something else felt off. It took me a while to figure out what. I kept walking, expecting to meet the switchback that always told me I was halfway to the overlook. It never came. The trail only had so much variation, and I knew it pretty well. But the turns and rises weren't matching my memory. I stopped and pulled out my phone again to check the trail map I'd downloaded. The arrow showing my position spun in a slow circle, then snapped to a spot about 50 yards to the left of the trail line, as if I were walking in the woods off path. I rotated in place, watching it twitch. It wouldn't settle. I turned airplane mode off just long enough to see if GPS would behave better. No signal bars popped up, but the arrow jumped again. This time a quarter-mile ahead, near a junction I definitely hadn't reached. The map stuttered, then froze. The timestamp at the top of the screen read 2:48 p.m. I checked my watch. 2:31 p.m. I held them side by side. The watch ticked over to 2:32 while the phone stayed at 2:48, then suddenly updated all at once to 2:32 like it was correcting itself. That tight feeling in my chest came back. I stuffed the phone in my pocket, told myself I was just being jumpy, and kept walking. I paid extra attention to the trail markers this time, reading the carved numbers out loud to keep myself grounded. The wind came back, but only in short gusts, like someone was breathing on the trees instead of a steady breeze moving through. A couple of times it pushed hard enough to sway the pines, then cut out completely, leaving the branches settling and creaking in a way that didn't match the air. When I finally reached the overlook, the view was normal. Valley stretching out below, distant highway, a few scattered houses. The sun was dropping toward a bank of clouds, painting everything pale gold. For a few minutes, I felt stupid for freaking myself out, and I took a couple of pictures, ate the rest of the granola bar, and decided to head back down before the light got weird. Going down, I tried not to think about the rock, but my mind kept circling back to it. I timed my pace with my watch out of curiosity. It usually took me about 35 minutes to get back to that spot. At 27 minutes, I started looking for landmarks. The crooked pine with the lightning scar, the big boulder that looked like a face. They came and went in order, just like normal. But when I reached the point where I knew the warm rock had to be, the trail looked different. The pines thinned out a bit, and a patch of exposed stone spread across the path where I didn't remember there being so much bare rock. It wasn't just one stone now. It was a slab, maybe 10 feet long and 4 wide, slightly raised from the surrounding ground. Frost edged it in a clean line. I slowed down and reached my hand out. Warm, not hot, but warmer than my skin. The same even warmth as before, just over a bigger area. I stepped onto it and stopped. The world dulled. The sound of the wind faded like someone turned the volume down. My breathing sounded farther away from me, if that makes any sense. The trees at the edge of my vision seemed to bend inward a fraction, like I was looking through a wide-angle lens. I looked up through the gap in the branches. The distortion in the sky was bigger now. It wasn't just a shimmer. It was a column, like a vertical river of slightly bent air rising up from the rock. The clouds behind it warped as they moved past, stretching thin, then snapping back to shape once they cleared the area. There was no color change, no light, just that wavering vertical strip. Standing on the rock, I felt a faint vibration through my boots, like a truck idling far underground. It wasn't strong enough to shake dust loose or anything. It was just there at the edge of sensation. I don't know how long I stood there. 10 seconds? A minute? Time felt slippery. My phone buzzed again, a quick triple vibration like a notification coming in. I pulled it out, screen black, pressed the side button. Nothing happened for a moment, then it lit up, battery at 19%, even though it had been in the 60s earlier. The time said 4:11 p.m. My watch said 3:03. My throat went dry. I stepped off the stone. The moment my foot hit dirt, the vibration vanished. The sound of the wind returned full force, making me flinch. I looked up. The column of distortion was still there, but thinner, like whatever was causing it had pulled back slightly. I backed away fast, eyes locked on that shimmer. It didn't move toward me. It didn't do anything dramatic. It just hung there, rippling gently, as if heat were rising from the rock in a place that was too cold for heat to be doing that. By the time I rounded the next bend and trees blocked my view, my heart was pounding hard enough to make me lightheaded. I almost ran the rest of the way down. Every now and then I'd feel a brief wave of warmth against my legs, like walking through a sunbeam inside a mostly shaded forest. It wouldn't last. Just brush past. But it always made me check the sky. Once, maybe 10 minutes after I'd left the rock behind, the trees opened up and I could see the ridgeline above where I knew the slab was. The sky over that part of the mountain still had that faint vertical wobble to it, even from a distance. Not a cloud, not smoke, just a patch of air that looked wrong. I focused on the trail and forced myself to keep moving. The light was changing fast now, going from gold to that flat gray that comes right before dusk. Temperatures dropped again. My fingers went numb even inside my gloves. The last half mile to the trailhead felt longer than the whole hike up. When I finally saw the parking lot through the trees, a kind of weak relief hit me. There were only 2 cars left, mine and an old blue Tacoma. I didn't see anyone around, but there was a faint scratching sound coming from the Tacoma's bed, like something shifting in a plastic bin. I didn't investigate. I shoved my pack in the backseat of my car and got in, leaving the engine off for a second to just sit. The forest was quiet, no birds, no voices. Even the wind seemed to have faded. I started the car. The radio came on automatically, mid-song. I reached to turn it down, but right as my fingers hit the knob, all the sound cut out. The display went blank for a second, then lit back up with a full volume bar and no station info, like it had reset itself. A high, almost inaudible tone hummed through the speakers, there and not there, like my ears were making it up. I turned the radio off completely. The hum stopped. The dashboard clock read 4:38 p.m. My watch said 3:29. I looked back and forth between them, then at my phone, which had died somewhere in the last 10 minutes. Black screen, no response when I held the button. That was enough. I pulled out of the lot and drove down the mountain, hands tight on the wheels. As I descended, the normal world seeped back in. I passed a couple in hiking gear walking along the shoulder, their dog trotting ahead. A truck came around a bend going the opposite way, headlights on. A crow flew low across the road in front of my windshield. By the time I hit cell range again, the car clock had synced with the time on my phone after it rebooted. They both agreed it was a little after 5. My watch still insisted it wasn't even 4 yet. I didn't go back to sync them that night. I left the watch on the counter and let it be wrong until the battery ran out weeks later. I've been up that trail since then, but only in summer and only with other people. We've never found that exact section of warm rock again. There's bare stone in a few places that might be it, but it's always cold when we touch it, even in August. Still, sometimes when we stop for water, I catch myself staring at the sky through the gaps in the branches, waiting to see that slight, impossible shimmer, bending the air, where the mountain should just be mountain and nothing else. The power went out sometime around 10:30 p.m. I'd been working on my laptop when the screen went black, and the whole house dropped into this heavy silence. No fridge hum, no heater kick on, just the dark and the quiet. At first I thought a breaker tripped, but the entire block looked out, street lamps dead, no porch lights, nothing coming from the neighbors' windows. I grabbed my phone and used it as a flashlight. Of course, the battery was low, 14%, because I'd forgotten to charge it. I tried the light switch a couple times, just out of habit. Nothing. For a while, I sat in the living room, unsure if I should wait it out or check outside. But something felt strange. Not just the quiet. The air in the house felt thick, almost like it does right before a thunderstorm, except there was no storm in the forecast. I cracked a window. Cool air poured in, sharper than it should have been for early June. That was when I noticed the vibration. Very faint, like the sensation you get standing near a big generator or a truck idling on the street. Except there were no trucks, no cars, no distant engines. It was like the air itself had a hum, not loud enough to hear, but strong enough that my skin picked it up. I went to the front door, hesitated a second, then stepped outside. The vibration grew stronger the moment the air hit me. Not painful, just noticeable, like the pressure was slightly wrong. My ears didn't pop, but they felt like they wanted to. The whole street was dark. Houses looked like hollow shapes. A few people, several houses down, were standing on their porches, talking quietly. No flashlights, no candles, just silhouettes. I walked down the steps to the sidewalk. The night felt colder than it should have, cold enough that I rubbed my arms. I'd only thrown on a t-shirt expecting summer air. Then I saw the light. It was faint, barely brighter than a star, drifting across the sky from west to east. Slow, too slow to be a meteor, and too smooth. No flicker, no sound, nothing trailing behind it. Just a steady, pale shape, gliding in a straight line, the way a boat moves across still water. I leaned forward slightly, watching it. My first thought was plane, but it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't shaped like one either. It wasn't really shaped like anything. It was almost spherical, or maybe oval, but hard to focus on. Every time I tried to pin down its outline, it seemed to blur just a little, like it didn't want to be seen clearly. The vibration in the air pulsed once, just a little stronger, when the light drifted directly overhead. I looked at my neighbor's house. Their dog, Baxter, usually a nonstop barker, was sitting silently at the edge of their yard, staring straight up. Not moving, not whining, just watching. I checked my phone to see if I could get a picture, but the screen wouldn't unlock. It lit up, then froze on the lock screen. The numbers on the clock glowed too brightly, almost washed out. I tried the buttons. Nothing responded. When I looked up again, the light had slowed. It hovered, or seemed to, not perfectly still, but almost. Like in order to stay in one place, it had to make tiny adjustments, small slides back and forth. Right, left, slide up, slide down. So small you'd miss them if you blinked. The vibration pushed a little harder. The air felt denser. Every hair on my arms lifted. I backed up a step, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. The street was too quiet. Even the people on their porches seemed to have stopped talking. No one yelled or pointed or called attention to anything. It was like we were all waiting to see what it would do next. A small breeze moved through the neighborhood then, just enough to shift the leaves in the trees. Except didn't feel like wind. It felt like the air was being pulled in one direction, then released. Not a natural gust, more like a push. A few leaves lifted off the ground and swirled upward in a slow spiral. They went higher than they should have, caught in a motion that didn't match the air around them. Then they drifted back down, as if someone lost interest. The light overhead dimmed slightly, then brightened. Not like a pulse, more like someone adjusting a dimmer switch. I felt my chest tighten. The vibrations sank deeper, almost into my bones. Not painful, just undeniable. "Do you see that?" a voice said behind me. It was Mrs. Carter from across the street, wearing a robe and slippers. Her eyes were fixed on the sky. I nodded, not looking away. "It's been doing that for a few minutes," she whispered, like speaking too loudly would matter. Another neighbor stepped outside, then another. The street slowly filled with people staring upward, all quiet, all still. The light finally moved again. It drifted eastward, gaining speed, not fast at first, but steady. Then smoother. The pressure eased just a hair with each foot of sky it crossed. Someone down the street muttered, "Satellite, maybe." But satellites don't change speed like that, and they don't make the air feel like it's vibrating through your ribs. The light picked up more speed. It wasn't dramatic, no streaking, no trail, but the acceleration was clear, smooth, controlled. Then it reached the edge of the neighborhood and brightened sharply. Not blinding, just a flare, a last glow that made the houses cast faint shadows, and then it dimmed to nothing. Gone. Not behind clouds, not dipped below the horizon, just gone. The pressure disappeared instantly. My ears popped. A dog barked somewhere. A car alarm chirped as if something brushed too close. The streetlights flickered back to life a moment later, one by one, like waking up. People looked around at each other, confused. No one said much. A couple neighbors walked back inside. Others stood around a while longer, staring at the sky like they were waiting for a second act. I stayed outside until the street was empty again. Inside, my phone finally unlocked. The clock had jumped ahead 9 minutes, even though the outage hadn't lasted that long. The battery percentage flickered between 13% and 6% twice before settling. The house felt normal again, warm, quiet, still. But later that night, when I lay in bed, the vibration came back for a single moment. A brief hum, like memory returning. My window rattled slightly, as if something passed overhead too high to see. When I looked outside, the sky was empty. But the air felt different, charged, waiting, like something had learned the outline of our neighborhood and hadn't completely left. I was camping alone near the Red River Gorge in Kentucky, a few miles off one of the less traveled trails. It was late October, that weird time when the air gets cold the moment the sun drops, even if the day was warm. I'd set up my small tent in a clearing just wide enough for it, with the tree line tightening around me on all sides. I'd been there once before with friends, but this was the first time I'd camped it solo. I'd already finished dinner, just a freeze-dried pasta bag and some instant coffee, and was sitting on a log by the fire. There wasn't much sound except the crackling and the occasional creak of branches shifting overhead. It wasn't windy, but every now and then you could hear the woods adjusting, like the cold made everything settle differently. I remember poking at the fire, trying to get the last bit of flame to catch on a stubborn piece of wood. That's when the ground trembled. It was one quick jolt, not enough to knock anything over, not even enough to be alarming on its own, just a single, soft, almost polite shake, like someone big had stepped on the earth nearby. The log under me vibrated. My mug rattled a little. Even the fire seemed to shift, as if something underneath had moved. I sat still for a second, listening. There wasn't any aftershock, no rumbling, just one gentle tremor and then nothing. I figured it must have been distant blasting or something. There were rock climbers, old quarries, random construction miles away. I tried to brush it off, but the woods went dead quiet afterward. I don't mean quieter. I mean everything stopped. No bugs, no faint rustling, no night birds. Just total air-sucking silence. Even the fire sounded muffled somehow. I remember holding my breath without meaning to. I stood up and looked around, half expecting to see an animal or something moving through the trees, but the tree line looked normal, just dark silhouettes against the sky. A few seconds passed, maybe 10. Then something above the clouds lit up. It wasn't lightning. I've camped through storms plenty of times. This was slower, like a glow being turned up behind a lampshade. The clouds overhead brightened with this dull metallic color, not white, not blue, not quite silver. Just a weird industrial-looking glow. It pulsed once. Just one slow, deep pulse of light that filled the whole sky above me, almost like it was breathing. Then it faded back into the dark. I just stood there staring up, waiting for another flash or a sound. But there was nothing. Not even a distant plane or a gust of wind. The woods stayed dead silent, like the whole place was holding its breath. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard the bugs again, starting all at once, like someone flipped a switch. The woods felt normal again. The fire crackled normally. My shoulders unknotted a bit, but the back of my neck didn't. That stayed tight. I tried to keep camping like nothing happened. I added a couple pieces of wood to the fire and pretended to focus on boiling water for some tea, but my ears were tuned to the sky in this wired, instinctive way. Every tiny sound made me look up. I kept checking the clouds through this small gap in the trees over my tent. I thought about texting my friend Kyle, but I had no cell signal at all, not even the one bar I'd had earlier in the evening. Eventually, around 10:30, I crawled into my tent. I wasn't really tired, but I wanted to be inside something with walls, even flimsy ones. I zipped the entrance shut and lay on my sleeping bag, listening. At first, it was normal. Crickets, a few distant owls, leaves settling. Then the silence came back, exactly like before. One moment the forest was alive, and the next, it was like someone muted everything. The absence of sound felt heavier than the presence of it. I sat up slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I waited, but nothing else happened. No tremor, no glow, just silence thick enough to make you feel like you weren't alone. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The air was freezing now, but I barely noticed. I looked up through the same gap in the trees. Nothing, just dark clouds barely visible against the darker sky. I turned slowly, checking the tree line, My flashlight beam caught nothing but trunks and leaves. No movement, no shine, no eyes reflecting back. Then a faint breeze hit me. Just a small one, brushing the tops of the trees and stirring the leaves at my feet. The forest noises kicked back in a second later, sudden and full, like I'd stepped into a room where a conversation was already happening. I stayed outside for a long time after that, just listening and watching the sky. Nothing else happened, but my nerves stayed stretched tight. I finally crawled back into the tent and slept in short bursts, waking every time the woods went too quiet. When I packed up the next morning, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Around the clearing, on the ground, the leaves, even a few logs, there was this very fine, pale dust. Not ash, not pollen, almost like metal shavings ground so small they looked like powder. It wasn't thick, but it was noticeable. It brushed off my boots in smooth streaks. Nothing above the clearing looked burned or damaged. The trees weren't marked, the ground wasn't scorched. It was just that faint dust, like it had drifted down overnight. I left earlier than I planned. On the hike back to my car, the normal forest sounds felt almost too normal, like they were compensating for the quiet from the night before. I didn't tell anyone about it for weeks. When I finally did mention the glowing sky to Kyle, he joked about satellites and weather balloons. I agreed with him out loud, because that was easier than describing how wrong the silence had felt, or how the light had pulsed like something alive behind the clouds. I've been back to Red River Gorge a few times since, but I won't camp alone there anymore. I stick to the popular sites where you can always hear at least one other person breathing or moving around their tent. The woods are beautiful, but I don't trust the quiet there anymore. I noticed it while letting my dog out behind the duplex. It was late, close to midnight, and the sky was clear enough that you could see every star. This was in Ridge Park, Colorado, where light pollution is low enough that the sky actually looks like a sky and not a faded ceiling. I wasn't even really paying attention at first. I was standing in the cold waiting for Hazel to sniff the same patch of grass she sniffed every night. Then I looked up, and there it was. A blurry spot in the sky. At first, I thought it was my eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed them a little, but the blur didn't change. Everything else, stars, the line of the roof, the silhouette of the mountains, was sharp. But one small patch, about the size of my fist held up at arm's length, looked out of focus, like someone had smudged a lens. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before it moved. Not fast. It drifted. Slow enough that I questioned whether it was drifting at all, like maybe my depth perception was off. But no, after a few seconds, it was obviously shifting across the stars, the way a cloud might move if it was way up in the stratosphere and incredibly thin. Except there were no clouds. The air was freezing and totally clear. Hazel growled once, a low, uncertain sound. She doesn't growl at the sky. At raccoons, sure. At the neighbor's cat, definitely. But not at empty air. She backed up toward the door. I kept watching the blur. My brain kept trying to interpret it as something normal, maybe a patch of wind distortion, maybe a tiny cloud I just couldn't see the edges of, but didn't behave like anything I'd seen. It didn't expand or thin out. It didn't shift shape. It just drifted, maintaining this weird fuzzy oval like an out-of-focus asteroid was passing overhead. When it reached a thin strip of cloud near the horizon, I swear this happened, it disappeared behind it, like it had depth. Like it was actually above the cloud. I waited for it to come out the other side. It didn't. Hazel scratched at the back door, clearly done with whatever was happening. I opened it for her, stepped inside, and immediately felt stupid for how fast I locked it. But something about that blur had wedged under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a trick of the eyes. I tried to go to bed, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked sitting in a dark room with the blinds open, so I closed them. Then I opened them again. I didn't want to feel like I was hiding from something. Eventually, I just lay there with my phone on my chest, scrolling nothing. Around 1:20 a.m., I heard a soft popping sound, like static from a radio just before it tunes in. It wasn't in the house. It came from outside, maybe down the street. Hazel lifted her head from where she was curled at the foot of the bed. Her ears went straight up. Another pop, slightly louder. Then silence. I got up and looked out the blinds. The street was empty, just the orange glow of the sodium lamp at the corner, the shadow of the neighbor's pickup, the fence line. No movement, no people, nothing. I almost closed the blinds again when I saw something shift near the far end of the street. Not a person, not an animal, just a faint distortion in the air, like heat rising off asphalt. Except it was below freezing, and this heat ripple was moving horizontally across the road. The air behind it shimmered slightly, like looking through warped glass. It drifted past the street lamp, and for an instant the light above it flickered. Not a normal flicker either. It dimmed smoothly, almost like a dimmer switch being turned down. Then the distortion passed, and the lamp returned to normal. I held perfectly still, fingers tight on the blinds. The distortion kept moving, slow and steady, until it faded into the darkness near the cul-de-sac. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I went outside early just to prove to myself the world was normal again. The sky was clear blue, no blur, no distortion. Hazel trotted around the yard like she'd forgotten everything. But as I was heading back inside, I noticed the fence. 5 of the boards near the far side had a faint powdery residue on them, like someone rubbed chalk across the wood. When I touched it, it felt cold. Too cold for sunlight to have warmed the board, but colder than the rest of the fence. My fingers tingled numbly for a moment after brushing it. I told myself it was frost, even though it didn't look like frost. That evening, I drove to the grocery store, partly because I needed things, mostly because I didn't want to sit alone in the house again. The store was bright, noisy, normal. I lingered in aisles I didn't need anything from. On the drive home, just after I turned onto Ridge Park Road, the radio cut out for half a second. Not off, not static, just silence. And then came back. I frowned and tapped the console. The same thing happened again a few seconds later. Then I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shimmer. A small patch of air behind my car, slightly warped like a reflection off water. It hovered maybe 20 feet off the ground and drifted across the tops of the trees lining the road. Compared to the trees, I could tell it was actually moving, keeping pace with me for a few seconds before veering off. My stomach dropped. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, and turned around in my seat. The shimmering patch slid between branches, then rose upward. Higher and higher until it merged with the sky. Gone. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was just some weird light trick. Maybe headlights from another car hitting ice crystals in the air. Except there were no other cars, and no ice crystals. And the radio cutting out right before hadn't felt like coincidence. Back home, I didn't turn on any lights for a while. I kept the living room dim and sat on the couch with Hazel's head on my knee. Every few minutes I'd glance at the window, half expecting to see that blurry patch floating there. Nothing happened for hours. Then, just after midnight, Hazel stood up abruptly and walked to the back door. Not whining, not scratching, just staring at it with her tail stiff. I joined her, but I didn't open it. Through the glass, I couldn't see anything. The yard was silent, but the air outside felt still, too still, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Then one star above the yard flickered. Not twinkled, flickered, like a candle flame. Once, twice. Then the star dimmed slightly and stayed dim, as if something had moved in front of it. I waited, not moving, barely breathing. Slowly, that dim section of sky, just a tiny dark patch, shifted to the left. A smooth, steady motion. It passed between 2 brighter stars and then faded, blending back into the night like it had never been separate from it. Hazel backed away from the door. I locked it again, even though I knew that wouldn't mean anything to something that could pass through the sky like that. I didn't sleep that night either. When dawn came, the world looked normal again. Cars starting, neighbors walking their dogs, distant traffic hum. But it didn't feel normal. I still look up every night, checking the sky the way you check a bruise to see if it's still tender. Most nights, there's nothing. But a few nights ago, a patch of stars near the tree line dimmed all at once, like someone touched the sky and smudged it. And for a moment I thought I saw something drifting just behind that smudge, as if the sky itself was hiding whatever was moving through it. I was halfway through telling Naomi about the weird customer from earlier when the wind just stopped. Not slowed, not softened. It cut out like a switch had been flicked somewhere above us. We were walking along the old coastal path that wrapped around the cliffs near Sandmere Point. The kind of place locals swore they loved, but rarely actually used. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds that kept threatening rain but never committing. The ocean below was restless, dull steel blue, waves smacking the rocks in slow, tired rhythms. I noticed the silence first, then the way my hair fell flat against my neck. Naomi stopped too, squinting up. "That feels weird," she said. I looked overhead. The clouds were still moving, sliding west like normal weather, thick and layered, but the air around us stayed dead. The grass stopped bending, the faint salt smell just hung there. No breeze at all. Naomi laughed it off. "Storm's playing games," she said, and kept walking. I followed, but something about it stuck to me. The way everything else kept going, but the wind. Like the space around us wasn't paying attention. A few steps later, the distant waves sounded muffled, like someone threw a heavy blanket over the shoreline. Our footsteps on the gravel path felt louder than they should have been. We kept talking, but it felt forced now. Naomi's voice echoed slightly, even though there was nothing around to bounce the sound back. Halfway down the path, the air grew warmer, not humid, just wrong, like standing too close to someone else's breath. "Do you feel that?" I asked. She nodded, rubbing her arms. "Yeah, I hate this place sometimes." Ahead of us, near the point where the trail narrowed, I noticed the fog rolling in faster than before. Not from the water, but along the cliffs themselves. Thick, pale mist curling over the rock ledge like smoke slipping downward. But even that fog wasn't moving the air. When we reached the narrowing, Naomi slowed. "Let's just turn around. This is creeping me out." That's when everything went quiet. Not just the ocean, not just the wind, no birds, no distant traffic, no waves. Just this hollow silence that felt like standing inside a sealed box. I looked around, heart thudding slow and heavy. Above us, the clouds kept drifting, but directly overhead, there was a break forming, a wide oval stretch where the gray thinned out. The edges of it looked smoother than natural. Naomi noticed it too. "Is that normal?" We stood there, shoulders tense, both staring up. In the center of that thinning patch, the light shifted. Just slightly. A pale, muted brightness growing through, not sunlight, not moonlight. It didn't cast shadows, it just made the sky look thinner. Then the humming started. Low, steady, barely audible at first, like a distant power line. But there were no towers nearby. It vibrated faintly through my chest, not loud enough to hurt, just enough to register. Naomi swallowed. "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer. I only nodded. The light above pulsed once, soft and hazy, like a slow inhale. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out automatically, but the screen showed no signal, no clock, no anything. Just black. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered. Naomi stepped closer to me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "We should go." But neither of us moved. The humming deepened, not louder, just heavier, like it pressed down on everything. My ears felt full, like altitude sickness creeping in. The clouds outside that oval continued their normal drift, but the ones forming the shape held perfectly still, like frozen cotton pulled tight over invisible structure. Then something darker slid behind it. Not a shape with edges, just a deeper shadow, passing under the thin light as though something massive drifted across the underside of the clouds. Naomi whispered, "What is that?" I didn't know. I still don't. It moved slowly, deliberate, as if gliding, and as it passed overhead, the air pressure shifted. I felt it in my jaw, my sinuses, like standing near a large truck, but without noise or wind. My heartbeat felt too loud in my own ears. The humming paused. Absolute silence again. Then a sharper vibration rippled through the ground beneath us, subtle but real. Gravel shifted under our shoes. I finally tore my gaze downward, just out of instinct, and noticed the tall grass to the side was standing perfectly upright, not swaying, not reacting, like it was pinned in place. When I looked back up, the pale light had dimmed slightly, but the darker mass was still there, stretching long, shapeless, slow. Naomi squeezed my arm hard, nails digging through my sleeves. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded, but my legs hesitated, like my body didn't believe what my brain was screaming. The humming returned, softer, almost gentle, and the light began to thin, pulling inward toward the center of that oval space. The shadow shifted once more, like it rotated, and then it faded, not moving away, just dissolving until the cloud cover thickened again. The wind snapped back on. Sudden and sharp. Grass bent. Fog scattered. Waves grew louder all at once. We both gasped. like underwater swimmers breaking the surface. "What the hell was that?" Naomi breathed. "I don't know," I said, voice shaking even if I tried to steady it. We didn't walk. We half-jogged back down the path, not looking up again, boots crunching too loudly against the gravel as if to reinforce reality. By the time we reached the parking area, the air felt normal again, cold and coastal and damp. The clouds rolled overhead like any other ugly pre-storm sky. Cars passed on the nearby road. A gull cried somewhere out beyond the cliffs. Everything normal. Too normal. Naomi stood by her car, rubbing her face like she could wipe the moment away. "You felt that, right? The air just stopping?" "Yeah." "And the sound?" "Yeah." She let out a dry laugh that didn't match her eyes. "Good, at least I'm not losing it alone." We didn't hang around, just awkward goodbyes, quick glances back at the sky, and then we drove separate ways. The whole ride home, I kept checking my mirrors and windows, expecting that strange stillness to return. But the breeze kept brushing the roadside trees. Everything moved like it was supposed to. When I got home, my phone suddenly reconnected like nothing ever happened. Messages rolled in from earlier, missed notifications, normal life piling back up. But later, that night, as I stood at my kitchen window, I noticed the clouds drifting slow across the moon again. And for just a second, right where the sky had thinned above the cliff path, one small patch moved differently. Too smooth, too deliberate. The air inside my house stayed perfectly still. Condensation formed a perfect ring on my windshield while I was sitting in the grocery store parking lot, engine off, windows cracked just enough to let the late summer air drift in. It was still warm out, no sudden chill, no foggy breath, just this smooth, clear circle of moisture like someone had pressed a cold metal hoop against the glass. It caught my eye because it didn't look natural. Not streaked, not patchy, just a ring. My name was Darren Kovach, and I'd pulled over in the far corner of the lot to answer a call from my cousin Mateo. The sun was low and washed everything in dull orange light, the kind that made the asphalt look soft and dusty. There were a few cars going in and out, nothing strange about the place, except that ring. I rubbed at it with my sleeve. It didn't smear. It just faded and then crept back into shape, like the glass remembered it. I checked my dashboard temperature out of instinct. 78 degrees. Normal, same as when I'd parked. Mateo was still talking on the phone, rambling about his new job and some forklift accident at work. I half listened, eyes stuck on the windshield, watching the ring slowly sharpen again. No mist anywhere else, just that circle, centered slightly to the right of where my gaze would normally rest while driving. "You okay?" Mateo asked. "Yeah, just distracted," I said. "Weird windshield thing." He laughed and kept talking, but my stomach had tightened in that quiet way it does when something feels off, but you don't know why yet. Another car rolled past behind me, a pale blue Prius, sunlight reflecting cleanly off its side windows. No fog, no rings, just normal glass. My phone crackled and Mateo's voice cut out. The screen flashed, "Call failed." I looked up to reconnect and noticed the ring on the windshield had deepened, thicker now, with tiny lines branching inward like frost patterns, but without the cold. The air inside my car still felt warm and dry. I rolled my window down more, letting the outside heat rush in, just to see if anything shifted. Nothing changed. The ring stayed. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, heading toward Route 6 like I'd planned. As the car moved, the ring moved with the glass, staying perfectly centered, almost like it wanted to be in front of me. No other cars had anything like it. At the stoplight, I leaned forward to study it closer. It had a slight shimmer, like condensation about to evaporate, but it never did. Around it, the rest of the windshield stayed perfectly clear. The light turned green. I drove on. It felt stupid to be unsettled by something as simple as fog, but this didn't behave like fog. It looked deliberate, measured, meant. Heading out of town, houses thinned into low fields and distant tree lines. The sky turned from orange to soft gray as the sun dipped lower. A faint layer of clouds rolled in from the west, nothing threatening, just heavy enough to dull the horizon. The ring pulsed once, barely noticeable, a subtle darkening and lightening. I blinked, convinced my eyes were tired. It stayed the same. A few miles down the highway, my phone buzzed with a text from Mateo. "Call me back." I tapped the screen, but the signal bars dropped to 0. No service. That didn't make sense. This stretch of road always had coverage. I crested a slight hill and glanced ahead, half expecting something to cause all this. The road stretched empty, quiet, just me and fields on either side. Then I noticed another patch of condensation forming, faintly near the far edge of the windshield. Not a full circle, just a soft arc like the edge of another ring that never fully appeared. A low, distant hum drifted into the car. It wasn't coming from the engine or the road beneath me. It felt like pressure, more than sound, vibrating faintly through the steering wheel. I checked my mirrors. No cars behind me, no trucks. Just open road and fading light. The original ring thickened again, clearer now, and I realized it wasn't quite round. It was too precise, too smooth. My breathing felt shallow without me trying. The hum grew slightly stronger. Not loud, just present. I pulled over onto the narrow gravel shoulder, tires crunching softly as I stopped. The car idled, the hum didn't change. The ring sat there, calm, as if waiting. I opened the door and stepped out. The evening air hit me full force, warm and still. No breeze, no insects, just quiet. Standing beside the car, I expected the condensation to whiten or vanish, but it looked the same from the outside. A faint, perfect halo on the glass. Still no sign of fog anywhere else. I took a few hesitant steps around the front bumper, scanning the windshield from different angles. Sunlight barely kissed the horizon behind me, throwing long shadows across the field. And then I noticed something odd. The ring didn't reflect the sky the same way the rest of the glass did. Through that circle, the sky looked slightly darker, like it filtered light instead of reflecting it. The hum deepened, subtle, slow, like the low note of something massive moving far away. I checked the field ahead, searching for any source. Nothing moved. No power lines nearby, no towers. The condensation around the ring began to creep outward just a little, thin veins forming like frost about to spread. But the temperature hadn't changed. My breath didn't show. My arms didn't feel cold. I stepped back, suddenly uncomfortable being so close to it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. Still no signal. Time read 7:12 p.m. I glanced back up at the windshield. The ring had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to know it was no longer centered where it had been before. It had slid slightly upward, as if following my line of sight. My skin prickled. The hum grew fainter, thinning like sound drifting away. And then something else caught my attention. A faint glow just above the horizon, far out past the fields. Soft, pale, almost like a reflection of the dying sun, except the sun was behind me now. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't break into pieces. It just hovered low, steady and quiet. The ring responded. It tightened, edges sharpening, condensation drawing itself into a clearer outline. The veins receded, leaving only the circle again, more defined than before. I stood there, frozen, watching the distant glow hold perfectly still while the sky slowly dimmed around it. Another soft vibration rippled through the ground beneath my boots. No birds, no wind. I forced myself back into the driver's seat and shut the door. The inside of the car felt heavier now, like the air had thickened. I stared through the ring at the glow on the horizon. The two lined up unnervingly well, as if the ring framed it. Several seconds passed, maybe longer. My sense of time felt slow and stretched. Then the glow shifted sideways, smooth and silent. The ring followed, not sliding across the glass like liquid, but reforming in that new position, as though it had always been meant to sit there. The hum returned, softer but steady. I gripped the steering wheel and swallowed hard, pulse loud in my ears. Fear didn't rush me all at once. It crept in heavy and slow, filling the space behind my ribs. The glow drifted farther left. The ring adjusted again. I finally started the car and pulled back onto the road, heart thudding. As I drove, the glow kept the same distance, never getting closer or farther, just pacing me along the horizon. The ring remained steady in front of my eyes, like a sighting target I couldn't escape. Mile after mile passed in swallowed silence. No radio, no service. Just the road and that quiet light. After what felt like forever, the glow diminished slightly, then again, until it thinned into barely visible haze. The ring on the windshield softened and finally dissolved as well, vanishing without streaks or residue. The hum faded with it. I slowed the car, breathing harder than I realized, watching the last hint of light melt into the darkening sky. Nothing replaced it. No sudden normal noise, just distant crickets returning and the soft rush of tires on asphalt. By the time I reached the edge of town again, my phone signal returned like nothing had happened. A missed call from Mateo. A few regular notifications. The windshield stayed clear the rest of the drive. But every time the glass caught the last traces of sunlight just right, I could almost swear I saw the faint outline of a circle trying to reappear, as if the surface remembered something it wasn't supposed to hold. The train had been running late all evening, that slow kind of delay that made everyone check their watch every few minutes like it might somehow hurry things up. I sat by the window with my backpack between my feet, watching the reflection of my own tired face blur against the dark glass as the suburbs thinned out into open land. It was just past midnight. The car smelled faintly of old upholstery and hot metal, and every now and then the intercom crackled with someone mumbling about the next stop. A guy a few rows up snored with his head tipped back, and a woman across the aisle kept scrolling through her phone even though the signal had dropped to nothing miles ago. I glanced outside out of habit, expecting the usual streaks of orange and white from distant houses or passing roads. Instead, I saw a line of lights off in the distance that didn't move at all. They weren't scattered or blinking. They formed a perfectly straight horizontal line, low on the horizon, like someone had drawn it carefully with a ruler and set it just above the dark land. Each light was small and pale, almost the same color as a distant street lamp. But something about the way they lined up made my stomach tighten. The train kept rattling forward, trees whipping by close to the tracks, but those lights stayed fixed in the same spot. Not getting closer, not drifting, just sitting there, level and still. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see if it was maybe a highway or some long stretch of parked cars. But the ground below them looked empty, no glow reflecting on the field, no sign of a road. A few seconds passed, then more. The line of lights stayed exactly where it was, unbroken. I glanced around the car, half expecting someone else to be reacting, but everyone looked as bored and drained as before. No one seemed to notice anything strange happening outside the windows. I looked back out. The line had not shifted even a little, even though the train had definitely moved a good distance by now. The longer I watched, the more it felt wrong, like those lights were somehow independent of the world around them. They didn't belong to the land or the sky, they just existed in that one place. Then, as the train started curving slightly, the line began to slip out of view. Not because it moved, but because the angle changed. It stayed in the same spot until the last light disappeared behind the edge of the window frame. My reflection filled the glass again. Just my tired face and the faint shine of the interior lights. I leaned back into my seat, trying to let it go. Maybe it really was some distant industrial site or a weird reflection I couldn't quite place. My brain already felt foggy from the late hour and long day. A soft vibration passed through the car, stronger than the usual rumble. Most people shifted slightly in their seats. A few bags jostled on the overhead racks. I checked outside again. This time, the lights were gone completely. Just pitch black fields and the faint outline of trees under the cloudy sky. I told myself not to think about it too much. The track ahead started running through even more isolated land, the kind of stretch that made the night feel extra quiet. No towns, no farmhouses, just darkness. 10 minutes passed, then maybe 15. I felt the sensation again. A subtle awareness, like someone standing just behind me, even though I knew no one was. I shifted forward, pretending to stretch, and glanced around. The snoring guy hadn't moved. The woman still stared at her phone. Everyone else looked drained and half asleep. I turned back to the window. The line of lights had returned. Exact same formation, same spacing, same pale color. Still low on the horizon, still perfectly straight, but now they appeared slightly closer, though the ground under them did not brighten or change at all. The train rolled onward, the trees and brush flying past. The lights did not react. They didn't shift or flicker. They stayed fixed in space, like they were pinned there. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass, trying to focus hard. No sign of a road, no reflection on the ground, no obvious structure. Just that impossible straight line cutting through the night. My pulse started to pick up. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept returning to it, like my brain refused to drop the pattern. For a moment, one section of the line softened, dimmed slightly, then brightened again to its original intensity. The rest remained constant. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a small upcoming stop with a name I barely recognized. The train slowed. The brakes hissed. The lights outside remained frozen in place even as the car gently rolled to a near stop. I watched the line as we waited. It didn't drift, didn't respond. When the train picked back up speed, the lights slowly slipped sideways out of the frame again as the curve of the track shifted my view. They vanished without ever changing position. A heavy, nervous energy settled into me at that point, the kind that made it hard to swallow comfortably. I tried distracting myself by scrolling aimlessly on my phone, though nothing loaded. My mind kept replaying the sight of that line, how wrong it felt. A few minutes later, the train entered a shallow tunnel carved through a low ridge. The windows reflected only the interior lights and the quiet faces of passengers. When we emerged on the other side, the landscape opened into a wide stretch of flat land. The line of lights was back, farther out now, but even longer, extending across a huge portion of the horizon. Completely straight, completely still. My chest tightened. I sat very still, watching. Something about it felt too deliberate, like the lights were aware of the train moving through the darkness, aware of this exact stretch. A faint hum drifted in through a crack in the window, or maybe from somewhere deeper in the car. It didn't match the train's usual mechanical rhythm. The line didn't change, but the area around it felt subtly different, like the darkness itself had shifted tone. I checked the time on my phone. Just after 1:30 a.m., I tried to mark how long I'd been watching, but the sense of time felt slippery, as if it refused to settle. When the train finally began approaching the outskirts of the next town, small scattered lights appeared closer to the tracks, drowning out the distant horizon. The straight line faded into the general clutter of normal nighttime illumination and then vanished entirely from view. I sat there for a long moment, staring at where it had been. The train pulled into the station with its familiar screech and shudder. A few people got off. A cool breeze slipped in through the open doors. I remained seated, still uneasy but unable to explain why. The rest of the ride passed without anything else that's strange happening. Just the slow return to familiar neighborhoods and the faint glow of real streetlights drifting past in messy, human patterns. When I finally stepped off at my stop, the night air felt heavier than usual. I stood on the platform and looked out toward the dark horizon one last time. There was nothing there now, just scattered lights and low clouds. Still, as I walked home, the image of that perfectly straight line stayed fixed in my mind, like it had never been part of the landscape at all, only waiting somewhere beyond the normal view, exactly where the train had been passing. A soft mechanical hum filled the night for several seconds. When it stopped, the silence felt unnaturally deep. I was sitting on the back steps of my cousin's coastal cabin in Port Ainslie, trying to cool off after a long day of hauling firewood and fixing a busted fence panel. The air was damp and warm, one of those sticky late summer evenings where the ocean breeze barely did anything. It was just past 10, and the sky was a dull purple fading into black. No stars yet, just low clouds drifting in from the water. My name is Lila Monroe. I'd driven out to stay a few nights alone while my cousin Trevor was away for work. He always said the place was quiet and peaceful, but that hum didn't feel peaceful at all. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, steady, almost clean, like the sound of something running smoothly on its own terms. I leaned forward, trying to identify where it was coming from. The small gravel drive beside the cabin was empty, just my dusty Subaru and a couple old kayaks stacked against the shed. The trees stood still. No breeze, no rustling. The waves rolled gently in the distance. When the hum cut off, the silence pressed in hard, too hard, like the world had paused to listen. I stayed seated, heart starting to go faster, waiting for it to return. It didn't. Instead, the distant ocean sounded weirdly faint, like someone had turned the volume down. I stood up and walked a few steps onto the sand, barefoot, letting the coolness ground me. The clouds above drifted slowly, but even their movement felt muted. I swear the night air felt thicker around my shoulders. A faint glow shimmered to the left, near the edge of the shore. Not bright, just a soft haze, almost like moonlight catching on mist, except the moon wasn't even out yet. I squinted at it. The glow slid sideways along the waterline, smooth and level, then blinked out. Okay, I said quietly, more to hear my own voice than anything else. I walked closer to the shoreline, wet sand squishing under my feet. Every few steps, I glanced back at the cabin, its porch light steady and normal. No flickering, no weirdness, just a plain yellow bulb over a screen door. The hum returned, shorter this time, vibrating faintly through my chest. I could feel it more than hear it, like when a truck passes too close, except nothing was moving. My shoulders tensed. I turned slowly in a full circle. Still nothing. Then the hum vanished again, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like even the insects had stopped. I didn't like that at all. A few seconds later, a thin reflection slid across the surface of the water, as if something unseen just below it had moved. There wasn't a splash, no ripples, just a subtle shift in how the light looked. I backed up a step. Another faint reflection passed closer to shore, then faded as if it had dipped beneath the surface. The water looked calm again, but I felt watched in a way that didn't match the empty beach around me. I started walking back toward the steps, keeping my eyes on the shoreline the whole time. The sand felt colder now, and the air carried a strange heaviness. Halfway back, the hum returned, longer and steadier. It almost felt like it was above me now. I tilted my head up. The clouds glowed faintly in one spot, directly overhead, a soft, milky patch where everything else remained dark. The glow was stable, not flashing, not pulsing, just hanging there, quiet and wrong. My heart thudded in my ears. I stood frozen, staring up. The glow shifted slightly to the east, smooth and controlled, and the hum shifted with it, like they were tied together. A few seconds passed, then maybe 10. I lost track. The glow slowly dimmed until the clouds looked normal again. The hum faded right along with it. The silence afterward hit even harder than before. My ears felt like they were underwater. I forced myself to move, walking faster now, climbing the steps to the porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that suddenly felt comforting. Inside, the cabin air was cooler, carrying the faint smell of salt and pine cleaner. I closed the sliding door and locked it, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. For a minute, nothing happened. Then the hum came back, softer, almost distant, like it was farther away now. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, trying to see through the reflection into the night. Outside, the sand looked the same. The trees stood still, the shoreline glimmered faintly. A soft band of light slid across the water again, slower this time. It arced slightly, then straightened as if adjusting its path. Still no splash, no sound. Every nerve in my body tightened. The light drifted farther out, then stopped completely. Just hung there, faint but distinct, hovering maybe a few feet above the surface. The hum decreased until it was barely noticeable, more like a pressure shift in sound. I waited, barely breathing. The water beneath that faint glow remained perfectly still. After what felt like a long while, the light dimmed and folded into the darkness until it was gone. The hum disappeared with it. I kept staring long after it vanished, expecting it to rush back or flare up brighter. Nothing did. Eventually, the normal ocean sounds returned. Gentle waves, a distant gull, a whisper of breeze. The night felt slightly less heavy, but not normal. Not right. I stayed inside for the rest of the evening, lights low, trying to distract myself with the old TV. Trevor kept beside the couch. Every now and then, I swore I could still feel a faint vibration in the floor, though that might have been my nerves refusing to calm down. Before heading to bed, I checked out the window one last time. The shoreline looked ordinary again. Dark water, pale sand, quiet trees. As I turned away, the glass caught a faint shimmer for a split second, like the afterimage of a light had just passed by. When I looked back, there was nothing there. The cabin stayed silent after that, but the air never fully felt the same. Like the night had pressed its hand against the world for a moment and pulled away, leaving behind an invisible mark that refused to fade. The forest went quiet so fast it felt like someone had muted it. I noticed it mid-sentence, halfway through complaining to myself about the cheap tent zipper snagging again. One second there were crickets, beetles clicking against leaves, the low, steady buzz that always filled the air this time of night. The next, there was nothing, not a single chirp. I stopped moving and just listened. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. I was camping alone at Lake Arbordale, a small wooded site a half hour outside of Harrier's Point. It was early fall. Still warm enough for mosquitoes, but cool enough to keep the sweat from sticking. The sky had been clear earlier, but low clouds had started rolling in around dusk, smudging the stars and making the trees look taller than usual. My name's Colin Dreyer. I'd done solo trips plenty of times. I knew the normal sounds of the woods. This wasn't normal. I stepped out from the tent, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt. The lake shimmered faintly to my left, reflecting a weak sliver of moonlight that kept disappearing behind the clouds. Everything felt too still, like the air itself had paused. Seriously, I muttered, scanning the tree line. No movement. Leaves hung limp. Even the wind had died down. Then I saw it. A dim light hovered just above the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Not bright, not sharp, just a soft, pale glow sitting there, barely illuminating anything around it. It didn't cast beams. It didn't flicker. It looked like someone had drawn a faint circle of light and left it suspended in the air. I stared at it, unsure if I should blink. It wasn't rising. It wasn't falling. Just there. My stomach tightened in a slow, creeping way. "Okay," I whispered. "Nope." The silence around me felt wrong, like everything that usually lived out here had decided to hold its breath. The only sound I could hear was my own, shallow breathing. The glow shifted slightly, just a few inches, drifting sideways like it was following a path I couldn't see. The trees beneath it didn't brighten, the ground didn't reflect it. It existed without touching anything around it. I took one step back, then another. The dim light slid a little higher and then slowly dipped, as if fading behind the top of the trees without actually moving away. And then it vanished. Just gone. No flicker. No trail. No sign it had ever been there. Right after, the insects slowly crept back into the night, one chirp at a time, building until the forest sounded alive again. But the normal noise felt forced, like an echo of how things were supposed to be. I stood frozen, staring at the space where the light had hung. "Just pack up," I said to myself, voice barely steady. "Just pack and go." Still, I didn't move right away. I kept looking, as if I might spot it again, or catch some explanation, trying to emerge from the darkness. Nothing did. Finally, I turned back toward the tent and started shoving things into my bag with more force than necessary. I zipped it closed, slung it over my shoulder, and tried not to let my eyes wander too much. The walk back to the trailhead felt longer than it had earlier. Every small crack of a branch made my shoulders tense. Every brief rustle of leaves drew my attention sharp as a knife. About halfway down the path, something odd happened again. The night sounds dulled. Not full silence this time, but softened, as if a layer had been placed between me and the world. The air felt thick, almost pressurized. I slowed. Faintly ahead through the trees, I saw another glow. Smaller this time. Lower. It brushed the forest floor for a split second before lifting upward and dissolving into the darkness. My heartbeat thudded harder now. I didn't want to follow it. I also didn't want to turn my back on whatever direction it might choose next. So I stood there, frozen, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. The glow never returned. The forest resumed its normal soundtrack, almost too cheerful in contrast. By the time I reached the parking area, my hands were shaky, even though the night air wasn't cold. I opened the trunk, tossed my pack inside, and got into the driver's seat with more relief than I'd expected. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, listening to the quiet tick of cooling metal. The headlights cut a familiar, safe path through the trees ahead. I glanced once more toward the tree line. Dark. Unremarkable. Just forest. The drive home felt endless, my eyes jumping to every bit of reflected light off the roadside. But nothing followed. Nothing appeared above the trees. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light and familiar sight of my house calmed my nerves a little. Still, I didn't fully relax until I locked the door behind me. Inside, everything hummed with ordinary life. Refrigerator, ceiling fan, the faint glow of my phone charging. I checked the time, 11:42 p.m. Only an hour had passed since I'd noticed the silence in the woods, but it felt much longer. I made some tea just to steady my hands, standing at the kitchen window while it cooled. Outside, the trees along the edge of my yard swayed quietly. No strange light, no silence. Everything looked exactly how it always had. But sometime around 2 in the morning, when sleep still wouldn't come, I heard it again. A moment of stillness. Just a second, where the world outside felt muted. Then a very faint glow brushed the tops of the distant trees beyond my backyard, pale and brief, like a whisper of the same thing from the lake, and then it slipped away, leaving the night unchanged.